please mute when you're not speaking. And we're going to kind of break the night up, since we're doing hip story, into different eras. And the first era is the first and second permit fights from 1983 to 1988, from Stronghold to the Texas Showdown. And so who's got a story to tell about back in those days? That was before my time.
The plan was for Feather to tell that story right now, and she was reserved a spot at the beginning. Is she on board? Or shall I call her and drive her nuts? Is she on? Well, Garrick, you were familiar with some of that stuff and others. And what happened, we're starting around 1982. My understanding was that was the year the Forest Service enacted the first permit regulation for groups, I believe, of 10 or more or 25 or more. And that launched the fights that led into the Arizona gathering. Just out of curiosity, are you picking up this screen share? I have a picture of the online Oracle, the Rainbow Oracle. Is anyone seeing that?
Yes.
I can see it.
Yes.
Cool. Okay. I don't know how it shows up in everybody's window. I got my window. And so I'll have some other stuff to throw up here, although I'll try not to throw up. And there'll be a few visual aids behind us. But I was not there either. This is all legend to me. I would like to ask Garrick to kind of talk a little bit about what was going on in those years and what Cochise Stronghold was all about, how the tickets came down in Arizona '84. And I'll have another thing up to support that in a little while. Garrick, can you pick up?
And while he does that, can you call Feather?
I will do so.
Yes, I'm gonna. Is this a good place for me?
I've been calling Feather and I got her answering machine, her voicemail, and I left a message reminding her that we were waiting for her on the Zoom.
Hi, Stephen.
Oh, thank you. I don't have to do that then.
Right.
Okay. It's still mute. I don't know.
Dana, would you like me to jump in and start?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I tried to pin you. Does everybody see Garrick?
Hi, folks. Just
No, because Scotty screen.
Okay, I'll get it out of the way if that works better. Okay.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And as much as the agenda calls for starting at the ticketing in '83, I want to really begin at the very, very beginning, and I want to go quickly and not go on too long because I tend to go on too long. The first thing is in 1972, we told the Forest Service, the governor's office, the police in Colorado that we were coming and this was going to happen and the thousands of people were going to show up, and we told them where we were going to be and they just didn't believe us. And when it really happened, they were completely flabbergasted and unprepared, and they blocked roads under a Woodstock law that was passed in Colorado after the Woodstock event. Many states passed outdoor mass gathering regulations, and we went to court over that regulation and we lost. The state court upheld the Woodstock law of the state of Colorado. There were more issues involved in that. I'm going to skip for right now, but as the press put it, the state won the battle but lost the war because 4,000 people went from where we were parked at Paul's parking lot in oh, thank you, I see my video up big. Hi, everybody. and marched on the little blockade the sheriffs had, and they were just swarmed and they didn't know what to do. They kept the road closed for 7 miles, and we parked right outside the blockade at the base of Table Mountain, which is where we planned to park all along. And people hiked the 7 miles in, or shuttled. Those cars that were inside were stuck inside for the duration of the gathering. And the key thing involving the permit and so forth is that after the 1972 gathering, there was a meeting in Washington, D.C., and we got the information from this out of Freedom of Information from Carter's era. And there were 50 or more agencies, and the Pentagon and National Security Council, and everybody talking about what the heck happened? What is this? Who are these people? And they decided 2 things. One, that we were such a bunch of complete losers, thugs, goofballs, and dope fiends that we were surely going to hang ourselves, and that we could not maintain a peaceful, organized culture, and that we were going to call in the police to help us with the riots that were going to happen. And they predicted absolute disaster. And they did decide that their policy towards us, rather than to shut us down, should be to do what they could to limit our numbers. And that, I believe, has been the underlying policy ever since. And they waited for several years, hoping that we were going to self-destruct. And there was a scene with the sheriff in 75 where the sheriff came in, and under the Arkansas Mass Gathering Act, they declared the gathering illegal, and they came in and they fired shots. It was a whole crazy, crazy scene. And ultimately, Barry said to the sheriff who was leading this armed posse, he said, well, you know, the Outdoor Mass Gathering Act says you got to have 750 or more people. I don't see that many people here. You see any 750 people? Pretty much everybody's right here. Now, some people were hiding in the woods and downriver and upriver, but, you know, there were maybe 150 people, 200 people in that area. And the sheriff said, no, I don't see any 150 people. And that was the end of that. They left. They didn't have a leg to stand on politically. In 76, the next year, Montana, there was vigilante action against us for all the stupid prejudiced reasons. Barry and Sonny's house was shot at. Their mailbox was blown up. Vigilantes threatened all kinds of stuff. And we had a big meeting with all the state agencies, and we proposed an operating plan, and they were not interested in anything. Everybody said, there's nowhere where you can go. There's nowhere where you can go, except the Lewis and Clark National Forest people said, well, we might have a spot. And people were appalled because the aggressive people in 76 were saying, oh, you know, you go up there, we just gas you. And the Forest Service was appalled at this. What happened in 76 is very important, because vigilantes were and trying to make an attack, planning to make an attack at the gathering. And the sheriff said, well, you know, you're an illegal outfit. You don't have any rights. We don't know what to do. We can't defend you. You're occupying public lands, and who knows what somebody else is going to do. If they do something illegal, they do something illegal, but we can't come and say to these people, don't come up here anymore. And we could say this to you unless you sign a permit. And then you will be a legal entity. And then we can defend you, and we can tell these vigilante groups to back off and go away because they're illegal and you're not. And that's what happened. We had a permit in 1976. All this mythology about we've never signed permits. That is not the case. And we had this permit, and we had, after that, a friendly relationship with the ranger. We cleaned up beautifully, and they said nice things about our cleanup and so on. The following year, we were in New Mexico, and there was a permit proposal made. And Feather knows all about this. I'll let her speak to it when she gets on. In 77 in New Mexico, there was a permit proposal made, and we began to see the problems with the permit. In 76, the permit made the problems evaporate. But in 77, New Mexico, we had a permit, and what it resulted in was the Forest Service trying to tell us where we should park, how we should park, which springs we could use, which springs we couldn't use, and where we should put our teepee circle and our camp. And they wanted us way up here, and we wanted to be down here near the water. And we argued about it and argued about it and argued about it. And they said, but you've got a permit, and we put the conditions in the permit that say what you have to do. And we said, well, I don't know anything about that. We're going to camp down here. And if you want us to camp up there, you go camp up there. And in 78, we had a very friendly Forest Service, and the Forest Service was very friendly to us, and we were challenged for a permit by the county. The county took us to court over this, and they claimed we had to have an insurance policy, and we got the people from Lloyd's of London to come in and testify. There was no way an event like this was insurable. There were just too many wild cards. Nobody on earth, not even Lloyd's, who insures the circuses and the moonshots or whatever, would possibly insure us.
Excuse me, what state was this?
Oregon, 78. We had a permit with the Forest Service, and our relation with the Forest Service was very nice. And the county came in, and they had demanded, not only did we have to have a permit, an insurance policy, but they said we needed to have 30,000 gallons of water storage. And they came up into the forest, and this was their big demand: 30,000 gallons of water storage for this many people to be safe and to meet the county's requirements, after they got shot down in court over this impossible requirement for a insurance. So in 78, they came up and they said, we had a meeting in the main meadow, and I said, you know, Forest Service, if you really want us to dig a 30,000 gallon hole in the middle of this meadow and divert that stream into this, you know, we got the people power and the shovels to do it, but this destroy a meadow. This is going to make a mud mess out of this gorgeous place that we're in. This is a disaster, and the county can't possibly want this. And the Forest Service said, we don't want this. And Badger, God bless Badger, he came forward and he said, I think you're all wrong. We have 30,000 gallons of water in storage. And everybody looked at Badger, and Badger said, and they said, where? And Badger said, follow me. And he walked us over to the stream, and he said, there it is, moving storage. And the county said, that's ridiculous. And the Forest Service said, looks like 30,000 gallons of water to us. And that ended that. And that was, I think, the last, we were starting to see problems with the permit system. It's the county wanted a permit this time. In 79 in Arizona, we had our longest and most detailed permit. So many things we got written into it about where we would camp, where we would park, all these things that we later put into an operating plan. But these were like 5 pages or 3 pages of things that we in the Forest Service agreed to. And it was basically very, very copacetic. It was not really a problem. But in 1980, the next year, the problem erupted because the government, the Forest Service, we were in West Virginia, the law enforcement arm of the Forest Service decided they were going to come down on us instead of leaving it to the resource and admin people who liked us. And what they did was they began hassling people on the road, backing up the cars, searching, terrorizing people, yanking people out of the cars, going over the cars with dogs, ticketing for the tiniest crack in the windshield and measuring the tread on the tires, stuff we have seen nonstop since then. And Ranger Bodine came to us and said, you know, we can make this law enforcement hassle at the front gate go away. All you need to do is sign a permit. And we said, well, you know, the permits have been problems. The county permit in the past, the arguments over permits and the stipulations in it. He said, just sign a permit. We had a council went on all day and on into the night. And there was no consensus to sign a permit except that those individuals who wanted to could go sign one and those individuals who didn't. And 1,000 people signed this here permit, and there were names on it like Badger, and there were names on it like you know, birth certificate names, and there were names on it that people made up on the spot. And the problem was simple. We had the permit, and the next day, the hassle on the road continued, and it continued through the whole gathering. And that was the great lesson to us. The Forest Service, nice guys, can say, sign a permit, and the problems will go away. And then they didn't go away. That was 1980. In 81, instead of a permit, we produced an operating plan. And we shared it with the Forest Service, and the Forest Service agreed to it, and we agreed to it. Yeah, we argued about a few things, but it was sit down, talk, negotiate, and we had an operating plan in 1981 for the first time. And when the gathering was over, they took that operating plan and they themselves wrote it up as a permit. The country. And it was a totally fraudulent document. Nobody had signed it. Nobody had agreed to it. And the Forest Service made it up. And in 82, in Idaho, the following year, we said, that's it. This business where they send us this phony permit, or this business where they say, if you sign a permit and we'll get the cops off the front gate, this is not happening. We are not touching that permit. No. And that is when the Forest Service and the other federal agencies began to figure out that we were not going to go away. We were not going to self-destruct and hang ourselves with our own rope. And they began in 82 to work on a permit CFR in the Code of Federal Regulations to have an outdoor group use, a group use permit put into place to rein those rainbows in. And they started writing that in 82. And a group of us went down there to DC when we saw that this was being proposed and discussed. And we went down to DC, a whole bunch of us, and we met with Forest Service people, and we told them, the simple thing is, as long as we're negotiating something about the land use, the water use, the parking use, the fire protection, the health protection, we're happy to sit down and negotiate and discuss everything of these things with you, every part of these things with you. But when you want one of us to represent the group, or a group of 3 of us to be the permit holders, you're losing us, because we want to be free and independent individuals. We want to demonstrate that humans can get together as individuals and a community, and not as a hierarchical organization. And they did exactly the opposite. They made a permit system where if 10 or more people gathered on the public lands, they had to have somebody represent them, take responsibility for them, take liability for them, and sign the permit. And that didn't go into effect until 1984. And they did not bring it up in California. They didn't bring it up. In 83, we had the most peaceful gathering ever in Michigan. Everybody got along. The Forest Service sent their local law enforcement person, local LEO, to sit by the gate and hang out. And the sheriff sent some people to sit down near the front gate and hang out. And there was no political hassles. We cleaned up. It went beautifully. But by the next year in California, the permit system was in. And even so, they didn't tell us. We had 35,000 people in California, as many people as in Colorado. Those are the 2 largest gatherings. And they didn't bring it up with us in California, I think, because they didn't want to take on a scene that had so many people and so much strength and so much coordination. They waited until a regional gathering at Cochise Stronghold, and then they moved in force, and they moved in on Feather and some of the other people that printed up the maps, and they demanded a permit or they were going to issue tickets. And that gathering and that permit crisis led to the Gideon Israel case at the next, because ultimately in Cochise Stronghold, they brought people into court, and Feather should really tell this story. But the key thing is, there it is. Scotty, you put it up there. We went to court because Gideon Israel and Patrick, forget his last name, it may be on there. Patrick Serziak were ticketed.
Cerniak.
And we went to court there in Tucson, Arizona, in Judge Bilby's court. I testified, people testified, and the judge looked at this regulation that said 10 or more people have to have a permit. And what it did was the regulation in this 1984 regulation that was first enforced in late 84 and then in 85, this permit distinguished between expressive groups and other groups. And the Judge Bilby said to our attorney, well, where does expression begin and other types of activity end in a non-commercial sense? And our attorney wisely said, please pass the salt is a protected expression. And the judge said, I agree with that. And the judge turned to the prosecutor attorney and said, suppose there were 9 Lutheran ministers, 9 Protestant ministers having a religious discussion at a picnic in the National Forest, and the 10th one showed up. Would they be liable to be ticketed also? And the prosecutor said, well, in that case, that'd probably be different. And the judge said, what do you mean different? How can that be? If it's 10 Lutheran ministers or 10 Protestant ministers, they don't have to get a permit. But if it's 10 free independent hippie types, they do have to get a permit. This is nonsense. And he ruled it just like the one-page ruling that Scotty put up as, I think, impermissibly unconstitutional. And that regulation fell. And because of that, in 86, in 85, later that year, we did not have a permit in Missouri. 85, in 86 in Pennsylvania, we did not have to have a permit. They didn't exist. In 87, we didn't have to have a permit because there wasn't a permit regulation out there, but the state came against us. And that is a whole other discussion. We moved from state court into federal court, and in the federal court, the judge decided he was going to come up and take a look at the gathering himself. And he came up and he walked the gathering with us. He came up and he brought the prosecutor and he brought the whole entourage of cops. He said, we're going to hold a hearing right here in the place, in the gathering. And as soon as he got to the up top place where the gathering started, there was parking below, and he got up top where the gathering itself, the encampment started. Joni and I were camped there, and this judge, he said, I want to see your shitter. And we marched him right up behind our buses, and we had a Class A shitter, lime, toilet paper, about as good as a shitter can actually look, because we didn't know he was coming, but we worked on it the day before. By luck of the draw, he looked at it, he said, this looks pretty darn good to me. And he took a tour through the entire encampment, and he saw a crazy scene. He saw this woman who was completely out of her mind, boots on her hands, standing on a pile of garbage, throwing things and cussing, naked as could be, boots on her hands instead of her feet, picking garbage up and screaming and cussing. And he watched as the Shanti Sena surrounded the piles of garbage and this woman, and they moved in close, and they moved in close, and they talked her down, and they talked to her, and the judge said, that's an excellent way to deal with that. And what the judge did was he said, look, I'm going to force you to come to agreements. And he said, I'm not going to throw out North Carolina's anti-mass gathering law because there are all these other events coming up this summer. And if I throw this law out, all these stock car races and these other events that are these other events aren't going to have proper sanitation or proper fire protection or proper parking stuff. So I'm going to force you to tell me what you want most, and I'm going to make that happen, or I'm going to hold you in contempt. And that's what happened in North Carolina. And by the next year,
That was 87, just to be clear, because you jumped a little bit.
yeah,
Garrick.
87, absolutely. That was 87. And by the next year, the Forest Service had put in its next regulation, which led us to Texas 88. And this regulation was for 25 or more people. Remember, the first one was for 10 or more. The second one was for 25 or more. And it had all kinds of stipulations in it about liabilities, about it really lacked protections for judicial review. Only the Forest Service could review it. They could take a permit application and they could sit on it for months in order to stifle an event from happening. There were all kinds of problems with this regulation. And we went to court in Texas in 88, and I will leave that story to others. This is, I hope I've been quick enough here, but I wanted to begin in 72, and I wanted to run it all up to the Texas case. And there's a piece from the Arizona Star about the Arizona case, which was where the regulations were found impermissibly unconstitutional. And then we came to Judge William Wayne Justice's Court in Texas in 1988, and perhaps somebody else will pick up the baton and carry it on from here. But if I have to summarize what I had to say, it is this: we were not irrevocably against permits until the Forest Service began to use them to restrict how we gather, how we park, what water we use, what we can recycle and not recycle, until they began to use the permits to restrict us. We were okay with the system, but when they ultimately said, if you just sign this, we'll stop the law enforcement from trashing your vehicles and harassing your people on the road, and then we signed it and they didn't do it, that was the nail in the coffin of the permits for us. And that brings us up to 88 in Texas. And I appreciate everybody listening. I'm glad this has been recorded.
Thank you. I believe Brother Waters Singing on the Rocks and Brother Massey are on board, who are very familiar with the movie in Texas in 1988. And that is when the Forest Service, after this prior regulation was found unconstitutional by the court in Arizona, they went back and wrote another one, promulgated it in that spring of 1988, and dumped it right on the rainbow gathering down in East Texas that year. What was the national forest? I'll remember tomorrow. But and they had pretty intensive roadblocks, and it was a pretty hot scene. People got hurt. There were lunatics running around. And you wound up with the government suing the Rainbow family et al., US v. Rainbow family, which then created a picklement because they tried to promulgate this regulation and enforce it and use it immediately to kick people out of the national forest. And what ho, a bunch of wavy hippies had to come out of the woods and go to court. And they wound up in Tyler, Texas. So let's tell the story. Water, are you going to do it?
Well, I want to say that you got some of that backwards, because they didn't wait until we were violating the permit or refusing to sign the permit. They brought suit way early. I don't remember
Correct.
if it was February or March that I got a subpoena in Kentucky to show up in court in Texas. And they started right away before anybody was even in Texas, except maybe Stephen Principal. There wasn't hardly anybody there, but they knew we were coming, and they went into federal court to stop us. And that's when the U.S. against Rainbow started, way before the gathering itself. And we had a problem with what happened. First, they didn't want us to testify. They showed movies that they had edited about what happened in North Carolina. And we happened to have the full movie. So we showed the judge the full movie, and he got pretty angry at the Forest Service. He also came, well, the local man came into the gathering, and the police were very heavy against him. We had the Forest Service trying to stop us, the state's attorney's office trying to stop us, the U.S. attorney, and the state trying to stop us, but they didn't coordinate, so that the state police and the federal authorities were fighting with each other. And sometimes one of them would cooperate with us, and sometimes the other would cooperate with us. And the whole thing was a real circus. I testified for 2 or 3 full days in court. And we kept showing that the Forest Service and the state police in North Carolina had created all kinds of problems. For instance, not allowing people to take out garbage. And then when the court there ordered them to let people take out garbage in North Carolina, then they wouldn't let the people back in. And when we found out that there was a problem with the water, and we tried to bring water into the gathering, the Forest Service and the state police wouldn't allow it in. And the more we showed the judge what was really going on, the angrier he got. And so everybody thought, well, he did a good thing for us. He said, go ahead and have your gathering. But what he did was he made us a legal entity. Up until that point, we were not a legal entity. We were an assembly, a free assembly of people. And while Garrick says that we weren't against permits, some of us weren't against permits. Some of us were very strongly against permits, saying that we didn't need a permit to have an assembly of free individuals. But once Judge Justice made us a legal entity, that changed the ball game a lot. I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say about it.
Well,
I'd like to hear Dave Massey talk about it some, and then I might chip in a little bit more.
Yeah, let me chirp in on one point, because I was not in Texas, I wasn't around yet, but I studied what was going on, and it's what's interesting is that they sued the Rainbow family as an entity, okay, and then a bunch of people showed up, and the judge had to make a determination. Let me start my video again. Okay, yeah. The judge had to make a determination to enable you guys, a bunch of folks, to defend the gathering and in some capacity. So it's that point the judge deemed that the Rainbow family was an unincorporated association, which was merely a procedural device in the context of the trial, but it turned out to be a real trap, because that is the premise upon which then the Forest Service has proceeded since. So that unincorporated association tag got, according to Ben Maisel, it actually got started in North Carolina, but it stuck in Texas the following year in '88. And we've been wrestling with that fantasy, that fiction, that demonology ever since. So is Dave Massey around? Love to hear what he has to say because he was close to a lot of these events too.
Okay, Texas 88. For the first time, a bunch of people that I knew who had been butting heads over and over years and years, finally decided they would get together and sit around the same table and try to hash it out. Ben Mazzell and several other people who will remain unnamed, but we had some really brilliant legal and some minds that were able to focus in on the problem. We put together a document which essentially was a report that could be brought to the Hill. People were given the responsibility to carry it to the Hill. I was one of them. We lobbied there in DC for a significant period of time. And at that time, we were able to focalize our argument, which essentially was the constitutional protection of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of religion were the main three basic tenets of the argument. And we had at our disposal one of the finest legal minds I ever knew, my friend Thomas, who's gone to the skies. And he was the person who was attentive enough to find that in the Federal Register, which is a publication the U.S. government puts out every year, the 25 people or more would end up having apply for and receive a permit prior to going to common ground. And we, of course, thought that common ground was the place where people could be individuals and they could, as long as they were peaceful, they could petition the government for redress of grievances. And that information was something that the government did not want to hear, but it was in their basic documentation, which, back then, the people we were talking to had all taken civics as a required course in their high school. So they had a background in law, history, and the founding of our nation and the documentation and the thinkers who got together to come up with a Bill of Rights and a Constitution and all the other documentation we're all familiar with. And that was the reason why I allowed myself to be drafted into a group of people called the Legal Liaison, mostly because I had proximity to the Hill. And I was involved in it for several years before, thank goodness, my friend Saylor put it out to essentially disappear the Legal Liaison as an entity. And ever since then, individuals have stepped up and given their individual opinion about whether or not they thought that we were a group of people, a group of individuals, that was not an unincorporated association that could sue and be sued, but we were a group of individuals who voluntarily assembled on common ground to petition the government for redress of grievances. And we stood upon that particular Bill of Rights, constitutional guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as one of the tenets of our culture. Ever since then, we've been constantly dealing with authority figures who feel as if, they don't have the education they need to be able to even get in the same pool and talk the same language with us. But hopefully this year we've got people who have an idea of what their constitutional and civic duties are to be able to deal with citizens who go to the common ground to get on the soapbox and say what they want to say to the people who want to hear. Anyway, that was over years of back and forth. We're still
Wait.
dealing with it.
Which years are you
And-
talking about most, Dave?
Oh, gee, 92,
Time frame.
93, thereabouts.
okay. We'll get there. We're getting there.
Anyway, that's pretty much all I really wanted to tell you, because my end of contribution to the gatherings was, I was a cook, and I was a person who came to be with family and enjoy my time together with each other. And, we may have not have agreed on everything, but at least I knew I had allies who wouldn't stab me in the back. So in those days, there was a lot of people, lots of argument, lots of dialogue, but essentially everybody I talked to pretty much agrees that this was a constitutional dilemma that had to do with freedom of assembly. And I still feel that way. I haven't found anybody who disagrees with the right of the people to assemble, peaceably assemble on common ground. And so that's the extent of my contribution to this dialogue. Love y'all. Bye.
I wanted
you,
to
Dave.
add something. I wanted to add that over the years, we've had people who went to prison, jail. We had people who paid fines. We have had people who had to go to court. And this is going to continue. And the people who are younger generations we're the olders, they're the youngers, I guess. I don't know how to refer to the people who are making up the majority of gatherers now. But the most important thing that I see about what we're doing tonight is to try to help folks understand that this has been a fight from day one, and it's going to continue to be a fight. And some people have to take responsibility for being the warriors and being the fighters until we can somehow put down the fascists in the government who think that they can control what we the people do.
Thanks, man.
Here,
Yeah,
here.
well, we're working on it. We got some stuff in the works, but you're coming up to this period where after Texas, there were a couple of, interesting years, pretty mellow in Minnesota. I heard Vermont, they brought the heat down. Don wants to talk about that a little bit. But they still didn't have a permit regulation. And one thing I want to kind of try to clarify, we can talk a lot about the targeted enforcement went on, and I can start a whole sidebar about the roadblock law that we started. But let's kind of hold focus on the history of this regulation and its effect. This business about creating a restriction that, they have the power to regulate, but this particular restriction created a conundrum for the gatherings. And we're down to the point where, Dave was talking about Thomas and the unusual guy who else would have been reading the Federal Register to know that the Forest Service published a rulemaking in May 1993, and he got rousted about it because he knew that stuff. Thomas down in Peace Park had been battling with the Park Service, which runs Lafayette Square, for the right to hold a First Amendment vigil in the primo First Amendment forum on Earth. And he got cranked up, went to both gatherings in Alabama and Kentucky that year to alert people to the fact that this new rulemaking had just come up in the Federal Register, and got people to show up in DC after both gatherings in July 93, and it was a hell of a show. Ellen Thomas is on board to recount some of that story because Ellen and Thomas were consorts together, and she was part of the vigil at 1601 Pennsylvania Avenue. And she probably saw that the crowd coming to town, and she watched the whole party. Ellen, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what went down in July '93.
Nobody but me. Did you have a question?
No, I had some info that I wanted to share. Me and Sailor and Jay Baldhawk and Val, we all started scouting the Nevada gathering in '89, and we started in March. And the state of Nevada is not an easy state to find a rainbow gathering, but we went through all the motions. We scouted almost the whole state. We found a lovely spot up there in the Jarvich Mountains up near the Idaho border. And whatever you fellas done in '88 made it a lot clearer for us not to have the harassment that we, even today we have, harassment. But the '89 gathering, we didn't have no roadblocks. They hardly even went in down in our hall and policed us. So it might just be the state, although the state of Nevada is not an easy state, especially in '89. There was still a lot of hype about us not being that friendly of people. But I just wanted to thank the people, the legal people, whoever did whatever they did in '88 to make our '89 gathering as nice as it was. Soma on the side.
Yeah, they fought like hell. Also, Ellen was sharing some screens from what happened, all the circles we had in Peace Park, and different. There was an action over at the Forest Service building and made some noise. The circle was real interesting because it started out as a legal liaison council, and that was kind of the familiar format. And I remember Dave Massey showing up with a big stack of files saying, here's the story. And he had a lot of the documents from the Texas case and some prior stuff. And he was in touch with Thomas, who was a great bootstraps constitutional scholar of our time. One guy who put out amazing piece of information was Stephen Wing. And this was his gorgeous and eloquent 7 criteria document, 7 criteria for granting a permit to exercise our First Amendment right to gather. And he had analyzed a chunk of this proposed regulation and the criteria that they imposed, which would be galling to the gatherings. And on the backside, the New World Order is alive and well. Yeah, if you can't assemble peacefully on public land, where can you? If you can't distribute primitive material freely on public land, then where? And Wing was one of the great contributors to the emergent trove of information. But what we did was circle up, and we had some serious stuff about it. But I met Thomas and realized that he'd been doing his homework on constitutional law of assembly and vigil, First Amendment stuff. I'm trained as a urban planner, land use planner, and I understood that basis of this regulation because it is ultimately a public land regulation. I understood the stuff. And that was when I got in cahoots with Thomas. I said, we need to look at this from a constitutional and environmental perspective and analyze this thing completely. And we got together, and the first thing we put out was kind of a proposed thing that went out to hundreds of people by mail and by primitive web and available channels to talk about what we thought about the stuff. And that went out initially. And then meanwhile, we circle up. We said, we want to lobby Congress, and we can't be rainbow. because if you be Rainbow, we're going to be blowing our cookies and compromising the whole thing. We're starting a new association. We have to be citizens doing this. And that's when the letterhead People for Compassion and Understanding showed up. Somebody invented that back at the Prop 1 office. Or we thought, well, should it be People for Compulsive Undressing? But no, it stuck. And we put together really tight packets of information, organized about 35 people were actively involved in this thing. So we had hippies reeking of patchouli heading up Capitol Hill. We had 130 congressional offices and handed off some tight information. Other people contributed to it, but yeah, Steve dragged me off the street and I was writing stuff up so we could have some coherent stuff to pass on to Congress and to stick in the nose of the Forest Service. Also, there were public petitions going. Thomas was advocating for people to get stuff in the public comment record on the rulemaking, which was still open at the time. And there were demonstrations and but that was the inception of PCU Free Assembly Project. A bunch of folks sitting down in a circle, figuring out what to do and doing it as citizens. And as citizens, we all had a right to advocate for our rights as we see fit. And it was no accident that creating this association made it clear that we were not going to be implicating Rainbow family in any public affairs. And that was really important because we understood that that was part of the fallacy of this new regulation as proposed. And we had to act as citizens and as any citizens may. So that's been a really important thing that's gone on for all these years. But in 93, we then took it to some congressional committees. I basically said, let's target Judiciary, Ag Committee, and Natural Resources Committee. There was three such committees on either side, the Senate and the House. We hit six committees with our information and pumped it.
Scott, excuse me a quick second. I have
yeah.
a dog that has to go out. I'm going to have to take a break, but I'll be back.
Fine. Now, one thing I would like to take a break for a minute too, because Feather just got on board, and I want to kind of hold this thing because what we did in DC was there was a lot that came out of that in the ensuing couple of years and leading into when the regulation was finally enacted in late 95. But Feather has a family festivity. She just has a new grandbaby. She's beaming in exaltation, but she had some things to say about the events from Cochise Stronghold in Arizona. And I really want to give her an opportunity to share that so she can get back to her family. Is that okay with everybody?
Got 15 minutes.
Yeah. So please, Feather, hold forth because we're going to backtrack a little bit in the history, but you had some really fun, powerful things to say about 83, 84 in Arizona.
Hi, all right. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Well, we did some pretty amazing regional gatherings in the Cochise Stronghold. And we started doing regional gatherings in 1983. That was our first one. And before that, we just had the summer gatherings. So these were much smaller gatherings, but they were really quite wonderful. And we have been working on coming up since we worked very hard on it, 83, 84, 85, on coming up with an alternative to just the permission slip from the Forest Service so that we could be really working with how we're going to lay it out, how we're going to do the kitchens, have everything in a way that's going to be very environmentally friendly and take really good care of the land. So we proposed to work with our own, what we call our operational plan, which is very, very detailed. So we started doing that back then. And there was a clause that was passed saying that we could not gather, that we couldn't gather with more than 10 people. And anyone on the force who gathered with more than 10 people and prayed over their food would be considered in the same category as us. So then putting this ruling against us would also prevent other people from being able to gather in the forest, any family or any group of 10 or more. So it wasn't fair that we would be under that one and no one else should either. So that was when we first went to court let's see, we were in Tucson. And so we went to court, and they decided that we should be able to continue to have these gatherings, but they wanted to have us to sign the permit and pay a bunch of money or go to prison. So it ended up that several people, the next time when we had our next gathering in the Cochise Stronghold, I was about to give birth. So I wasn't in the forefront of the gathering at that time. But Gideon Israel was helping out with that. And he was given the ticket. And then Barry Plunker got the ticket, and Garrick and Joni. So these were all folks who had to sit in jail over us having a completely legal event on national forest land. So that was really a frustrating and difficult time for us. But I would also like to talk about the California gatherings, because after that one, after 83, we had a very large gathering in Northern California in 1984. We had probably 25 to 30,000 people at that gathering. It was the largest one that we have had since the first gathering, which was about the same amount, 20 to 30,000. And it was a very wonderful gathering. We worked out our operational plan. We followed our own operational plan, and we worked with a really wonderful district ranger. And hold on a second here. Mike Lee. Mike Lee was his name. And he was great. He was really great. He worked with us. He saw that what we were doing was working out environmentally, and that we were taking really good care of the land, and that things were working out. So towards the end of the gathering, when we started doing our cleanup, we had a really smooth exit from the gathering. There was very, very few problems at that gathering. And we did a beautiful cleanup. And within, I would say a week after the main group of people had left, we were standing in the main meadow, and Mike and I were hugging each other, and there were already flowers coming up, and things were looking really, really good. And our crew stayed. The only major damage that happened was to a little hiking trail going down into this tiny little lake called Rainbow Lake. And after we had our big prayer, we have a silent prayer for world peace and meditation. And after we had the prayer, many people decided to hike down that trail. Well, I was a little upset about it because it was a deer trail, but with many people going down there and then back up again, we knew we had a lot of restoration to do there. So We did, and we did an absolutely beautiful job. There was a crew of us who stayed for weeks and weeks and weeks after the gathering, and we created these wonderful water bars that were made of rock. And I think we had something like, maybe at least 60 water bars that we did on one trail going, 2 little trails going down in there. And we took, a good solid week and did a beautiful job on them.
Wow.
And then I heard that later, the Forest Service would take their folks that they were training to go visit our water bars as examples of how you do it, because we did it so well that the cows couldn't knock them out. I mean, we built a beautiful trail and preserved, to keep it from washing out and getting dirt down into the lakes. So that was a really excellent experience. Then 20 years later, we had another gathering in California, and it was also a large one, not that large, probably over 10,000 for sure. But we had it in a similar area, and it worked out really beautifully again in that area. And Edie Ashcroft was the district ranger then. And she was very, very interested in how we were going to protect the land, set up our trails, how we were going to do anything to create the very, very least amount of damage to the land, and to preserve the green, the grass areas, and to stay off of the delicate meadows. So that's how we do it. We set it up like that. We do a beautiful job with the latrines, with the water system. And she wrote a really, really great, about a month after the gathering, she did her synopsis, and she said that they have done such an amazing job in the parking lot. Even she says there's not even a rut left. You can't find anything.
Hey,
So
Feather,
yeah.
I was going to kind of prompt you. First of all, you're bobbing around with your phone, and we're all going to go puke in the corner of your room.
I'm sorry.
Okay. The suggestion I wanted to remind you about was, like, you also got a ticket in Arizona in '84. And you had a little different outcome with your case, but you didn't really tell the story of how you had to put up some kind of court fight and dance with some lawyers as well. So share a little bit of that, because that was another part of that germinal story. We wanted you here to start because that was the time frame. So we're doing a little flashback here. We've done that before. Tell that story a little bit.
Well, actually, I was the only one who gave their legal name when, let's see, I can't remember his name. This was another ranger. When he came in and he gave tickets out to everybody who was there. Well, I signed my real name. And so not too long after that, when I was living at my daughter and her boyfriend's house, and a ranger came up and knocked on the door and gave me a letter to appear in court. So I did, and I brought a bunch of people in with me, a lot of people who had been to the gathering. I don't know who made the comment. Somebody was looking at all of us out there, and they said, "Who is this? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or something?" A bunch of hippies for sure. So we went to court, and we, I ended up not getting put in jail. And I guess it was because it was the first one, and they hadn't decided what exactly they were going to do with us. So we went to court, and it was dismissed. But then the next gathering that we had there, that's when people were getting put in prison.
What year was that?
That was let's see, 83. Probably, yeah, 83 and 84.
Yeah, and that's when Gideon Israel and Patrick Cerniak got cited together. I guess they are the two co-defendants who were named in this court order. And-
Right. So the next regional we had there, Gideon was the one who took the ticket.
Right.
That
Right.
ticket, what was that ticket and that Cochise, that second Cochise, that was 85.
No, it must have been a little bit earlier than that.
I think it was 84.
83 was the first one we had, and it was up where the gathering site was, the New Mexico gathering site, up near that area. And then in the spring of 84 was the one we had in Cochise, I believe.
Right. And I think that's where they were cited, but the ruling didn't come down for a couple of years. So that explains the disparity in the dates. The ruling is dated May 1986, but that's not uncommon in these cases. And it said such a regulation impermissibly singles out those who wish to gather in order to exercise their First Amendment rights. The court finds that this regulation is therefore unconstitutional. And yeah, what a story. One put them to work. So Ellen, I would love to hear your observations about that time because you had some good recall about it.
Yeah, I'm thinking that had to have been in 1992, Scotty, because
That was 93 for sure.
Really,
Absolutely.
I guess people were getting people out to vote then, because by that time it was already scheduled for the ballot.
Well, yeah, you were doing the hard ward healing, and people were hitting the streets for you, and so it was actually some really successful organizing got done.
It was
over
amazing.
those couple of months.
We couldn't have done it without the rainbow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I stayed in DC and wrangled with Thomas, and Ellen, you're the first to acknowledge he was I used to call him the gnarly peace gnome, and because he could get kind of rancorous, but we worked together and we managed to get a bunch of stuff to congressional committees. Now I'm going to do another little screen share here when I find it. Okay, this thing jumped.
By the way, it's really nice to see everybody.
Oh yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen a lot of these folks.
Yeah. What we I'm going to try getting this thing up. Oh yeah, this is a text version of the legal and land use review that Thomas and I prepared. This is actually an abstract, so I'm going to try to hide everything else and make this available for a screen share for a minute. But what this wound up being, this was actually a telltale little piece, because in those days of the primitive web, we had to think about some crusty guy plunking away on a 286 who had to have access to something in ASCII format. And so this was the published web version of the abstract that we did. Now, the legal and land review was really prophetic in terms of dealing with the constitutional and environmental flaws, noting, for example, that they proposed this rule and they weren't in compliance with NEPA requirements in terms of doing a threshold test on whether such a regulation was needed, whether there was ever any significant impact involved. But Thomas and I banged and harangued on this thing for several months. This came out in late fall and went to Forest Service Chief, USDA, White House Office of Domestic Policy, 6 congressional committees, and a bunch of other places as a rigorous kind of interdisciplinary policy analysis. And it really foretold a lot of the hassles that the gatherings would incur. And it made note of, you'll see here, these two rulings, these two key rulings that had preceded it, US v. Israel, where the charges were dismissed against Gideon and Patrick, and US v. Rainbow Family, where that court in Texas found the regulations unconstitutional. And here they were again. This was the third major rule proposal, but this time they did it right by the book. They published the thing in the Federal Register, created a comment period, and it's proper notice and comment, or they call it informal rulemaking procedure. And you know, they did it by the book. And I ran into I was in DuPont Circle having a drink one night, and I run into this guy who was an environmental lobbyist. I told him what we were doing. And the guy looks at me and says, "You guys are getting at the rulemaking?" I said, "Yeah." See, nobody ever does that. No, everybody waits for the final rule to hit, and then they throw up their arms and go into a tizzy. He was blown away that we were so on top of it. They got to the rule proposal and were kicking back before they stuffed it down our throats. Now, one interesting thing that occurred, you know, this thing went in that fall, and this is just an abstract. I can make this stuff available, by the way. I'll figure out some way of letting you know where all these screen shares can be found. I tried to do that, just didn't have time in advance. But
Scotty, can we listen to Ellen for a while?
I would gladly listen to Ellen some more. I thought she was kind of brief, and I thought she was done. But if I'm wrong, Ellen, kick me in the shins and proceed.
No, I don't. Well, I don't really have much to say. You know, I've been working on getting rid of nuclear weapons all these years, and I love the rainbow, and Thomas definitely did. And I remember when was it Garrick and Plunker and Dave came and asked Thomas if he would take responsibility for the entire legal liaison documents, and all these boxes of of the rainbow information came to our eensy weensy little basement office that we had managed to wrest out of the universe, and we had them until Scotty took them over a few years ago after Thomas died, and has been, I think, trying to get somebody to help him to get it all digitized. Yeah. And Thomas was very dedicated to keeping it going, and he went to more gatherings than I was able to, because we didn't usually go together, but we did go together once in 1990. Is that 95? We went to Minnesota, and that was an amazing experience. So I don't really have anything to say except that I love you all. And I live in the mountains of North Carolina, and if anybody is, this is a picture taken this weekend after our big snow, the first snow in 2 or 3 years. Since climate change began, it's kind of unusual. But go ahead, you guys. You keep going.
There's some other folks on the call who are around this scene in DC. I have like kind of the core of the story to kind of carry through to those couple of years. I was there basically through January, and we got a lot of stuff done. One of the telltale moments, I don't have this handy for screen share, but on the 1st of November, 2 interesting things happened. 1st of November, 1993. I think right around that time, Congress passed the Freedom of Religion Restoration Act, and Thomas saw this as an important premise in terms of affirming a higher standard of scrutiny on religious exercise, and there's definitely that element in the gathering. And on that day, on the 1st of November, another thing paid off in that a letter came out of the House Judiciary Committee to the Secretary of Agriculture telling them that the those on the House Judiciary Committee considered this proposed regulation to be unconstitutional and really problematic. And that and a couple other things in the committees really stymied them, because we expected the Forest Service to just implement this thing point blank real fast, but this backed them off for a while. And then we were pretty busy. I went to Chicago and I formed a new chapter of PCU there. And we developed there was a nice piece of information I'm going to put up on the screen share, because we did this gorgeous brochure. Okay, it's there and I'm going to share it. Yeah, here it comes. Now, yeah, here we go. So this was a brochure that we did. It was a legal size bifold 4-page thing jammed with information. And we printed up a shitload of these things. There's a funny thing about the image on the front. I had envisioned like a rendered scene with people in a circle in a mountain form coming up, rising to the right of the image. And then we ran across a full centerfold spread in the Always Free from Colorado, which was a big picture of the first circle 20 years before in Colorado. And I said, my God, it's more significant that this thing is real, that these people are real than rendered imagined people. And so we adapted a cropped image of that circle. That image is from Colorado 72. And we used that to put up a fight. What happened the spring of 94 is the Forest Service also proposed law enforcement rules, vastly expanding their law enforcement powers. So we were putting up a war against 2 Forest Service rulemakings that spring. We also put out a thing. I went up to Madison and Ben Mazel and Info Dwayne and a bunch of other people were up there. We powwowed about what this new law enforcement rule. I found out about it and it was already in comments. And we went up to Madison, came up with a plan, published a thing on the old web called the Son of Frankenregs piece. It was a few pages that went out on the web analyzing that rulemaking, set loose a shitstorm all over the primitive web. 4 Western senators jumped up and wrote the chief of the Forest Service a nasty letter, and we stopped that rulemaking on May 16, 1994. Jack Ward Thomas, the chief of the Forest Service, issued a statement withdrawing the proposal. And this was really really amazing jujitsu, because literally nothing was doing about this issue anywhere until a bunch of crazies in Madison put out a piece of information on the web that caught fire. So I have the Son of Frankenred thing elsewhere, but this was the public information piece that we're using as a brochure around the country. This was the original. I cleaned it up and matted it because it looks better this way. But I have one copy of this that's autographed by Ken Kesey, because I went to a literary event and spouted off, and I got Ken Kesey's autograph. It says, "Beam us up, Scotty." So I'm very proud of that. That's in the other room. But this fight was ongoing, and my outrageous contention is that there was also a lot of division. People were under illusion that we were exposing the family by the work we were doing in DC, and the irony is that was not the case at all. But if anyone went to the Wyoming gathering in '94. It was on the 3rd of July, when it was first proposed, as noted by Saylor, that legal liaison be abolished because it would seem to be compromising the position of the rainbow and exposing it in a way. And I said, well, somebody keeps talking about somebody representing rainbow family. What's going on? Nobody knew me then. I'm sitting in the circle, and Saylor says, we got this thing from Scott Addison from the legal land use review that went to the Forest Service from legal liaison. I said, no, that never went anywhere. That went to people to look at as a matter of accountability to as many people as we could find. This is the legal and land use review that went to the Forest Service from People for Compassion and Understanding. And that set loose a shitstorm.
Scotty,
Very contentious. And
Scotty,
then
someone has a hand up.
Okay, I'll be there in a minute. We're going to take questions in a few minutes, okay? Let me just finish this. The short story. At that moment, the big fire alarm came up that day, and we all wound up putting out this what could have been a dangerous giant blaze in the woods in Wyoming. And that's another wonderful story, but I was kind of in on starting up the bucket brigade because I was carrying buckets of water. And I believe in that era, we could have stopped this group use rulemaking if we had had a little more unity among us. And over those couple of years, we missed opportunities. But the next gathering in New Mexico was beautiful, and the Forest Service was pretty cooperative, except for the little stink they tried to raise with the Osceola Association. Okay, who's trying to ask a question? I mix.
So Scotty, the last document and the 7 criteria, can you pop those into the chat, like and let us have copies of that? Because those really do seem like bite-size, handleable,
Well, yeah,
work for us.
They're great. They're great items, but they also apply to the rulemaking as it was proposed in '93.
But that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
What I'm asking for is a little history and some tools to build my knowledge of history. So that's all I'm asking is if you could share them.
Well, I can. I can't throw the documents in the chat, and I don't have links for them yet. I didn't have time to upload them. So what I will probably do is I will publish a link that will go good in a day or so with those documents on it. We can't put them in the chat because they're PDFs and that sort of thing. The chat can't handle those documents. It can only handle links.
But you can put your email address. You can give us your email address.
Yeah, well, my email address has been in everybody's clause, so you can get that anytime. But what I'll do before the end of this thing, I'm going to give you a URL which will be good in a day, which will have a page of that on that address, which will have all these links on it. How's that?
Okay, it's just those 2 documents, though.
Well, yeah,
I don't want to get lost in every piece of paper that you've ever handled. You're an attorney that handles.
I'm not an attorney, and I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on TV.
Okay.
But no, that's the way I can do it. That's the way I can do it is I'll put up a link that will be good in a day on the website, so all the stuff will be accessible. We can't throw PDFs into the chat, I don't believe.
Yes, you can actually, but that's okay.
If somebody want to tell me how, I'll do it.
You just start to type a message and hit the little icon that looks like a page, and it asks you when you do that where the document is, and you say your computer, and then you take the document from your computer and insert it there.
Okay, let's see now.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to work that. And that stuff will happen. When I have a chance to shut up. That'll be soon, I hope.
We all hope.
So what we're getting to, though, is the fact that we held this rulemaking off for a couple of years. We had an opportunity to attack it politically. I think we missed that opportunity with all the fragmentations and factions that were flying in those days. And I would say the New Mexico gathering in '95 wound up pretty good. I remember a press clip. Local news got the forest supervisor on and said, "Why don't these people have a permit?" Well, he said, They have a First Amendment right to gather, and we just try to cooperate with them. And the irony of this is that, bingo, we had it right in 1995. And then on August 30th, 95, they published the final rulemaking. It took effect 30 days later on September 29. And the first enforcement, we were ready. We were waiting for the shit to come down in Shawnee, but nothing happened that fall of 95. However, I did get into a roadblock situation that I fought and won, and that led to that led to some stuff in 96. But right, I went to court on that, won my case beginning early February 96, and down in Hardin County, Illinois, the tip of Illinois on the Ohio River. Went to St. Louis for the first time to help folks because the next gathering was going to be in Missouri. And that's when we find out that the cops landed hard at Osceola National Forest in Florida. That year, the Ocala was in Osceola. Sued the Rainbow family again, named 33 representative defendants who had been stopped at the roadblocks, and they got their name, and they were deemed to be agents of the Rainbow family. They sought an injunction against all such gatherings unpermitted, and wanted a class certification against the Rainbow family such that this would be a sweeping injunction across the country. We were scrambling from long distance. I was on the phone with people I never heard of before and trying to help out from afar. The long story made short is no lawyers showed up. I thought it was one smart thing principal did, I think, when he was down there, kept lawyers from showing up in the courthouse. Nobody did. Wound up 12 people who wound up with default judgments and a ruling that didn't mean anything. But we were on alert that they were trying to certify the Rainbow family as a class. And that led us into Missouri. And I have a short fable from the weeks leading into the Missouri gathering, because I was in Chicago and we were working on, there was going to be a Democratic convention in Chicago, and we're kind of preparing for that. And what ho, Rainbow Turtle walks up on me with his robes and his staff festooned with all sorts of glittery things and bangles and stuff like that. And he said, "Scotty, I got great news. I talked to the Forest Service. I worked it all out. We don't have to worry about anything. The Forest Service wants the Rainbow family to teach the world how to live on the earth and take care of the earth, and everything's going to be fine." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, I made a little arrangement." I said, "Wait a minute. You didn't sign a permit, did you?" He said, No. It was an authorization." I go, "Dope. That's what a permit is." I say, "Okay." I'm standing in the street on the north side of Chicago with this guy in a robe asking him questions like I'm going to get a straight answer, and I kind of did. I said, "Wait a minute. Okay. So what was the name of the group entity, the holder of this thing? What was called?" He said, "It was the Divine Composting and Composing Church of the Sacred Rainbow Imagination." I go, "Divine Composting Church? Holy shit." And thenceforth, it became known as the Holy Shit Permit. Well, I was in denial for a day. And then it was on a Friday afternoon, I called regional headquarters in Milwaukee because I knew that's where Rainbow Turtle, AKA Paul Lincoln Schubel, lived. And I figured he went there. I got that sense that he went there. I heard, okay, so I verified. I get this lawyer in the Office of General Counsel, and he says, "Yeah, he was here. Yeah, and we all kind of talked to him and went through it, and he made us hold hands, but he signed it." And I said, "You realize that guy didn't have authority to do anything for anybody?" And there's this dead silence on the end of the line, like, uh-oh. Like the lawyer knew that this thing was completely fraudulent, but that's what headed off Billy Ball, who was going to land with both feet on the gathering in Missouri on the permit thing. And all of a sudden there was a permit signed in Milwaukee. And I put out the news that Friday night. Holy shit, permit. And that went out on the web, and there we went. Well, what wound up happening from there is that we prayed together on the 4th of July, Paul and I. And I said, we have some work to do, because we wound up dealing with a gathering with a load of work roadblocks and all sorts of nasty stuff. And I had a notebook computer with me, and old PowerBook 180, and we went and holed up and put some work together and prepared.
Hey,
I got a
can
screen
you hear me,
share coming
Scotty?
up.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Can I interrupt just for 1 second?
Who's that?
I came in a little bit early. I kind of heard the end of Garrick was going through the history kind of briefly of each of the beginning gatherings, and it was pretty interesting. And then it's kind of turned into this monologue that is really going on and on and on. But when I came on, it said there was like 20 people on here, and I would love to have other people share their histories. We kind of ended in around the mid '95, and now it's 27 years later right now.
We're getting to that.
Wait a minute. I have my own ideas about, I think we should look for solutions to our problems. And I think that this whole law enforcement thing, and we've been playing defense this whole time, and I do believe there's certain ways we can play offense. But a monologue about all these old war stories and minutiae that goes on and on and on. I'm kind of getting yawny and losing it. And I don't know how you put a limit, but that's my opinion. Anyway, I love y'all.
Scotty,
Thank
there
you.
is a thing.
We're trying to cover some history. These are just facts, okay? And we're going to get to what our situation is now, okay? And
Scotty,
I wish it
You
weren't.
say we. It's not we. It's you.
I have a certain part of the story to tell, and I'm sorry you missed the other people talking.
Why don't you take it to a breakout room? Can the moderator put Scotty in a breakout room?
No, we're not. I'm not going into a breakout room. That's not what it's for. And this is the intent here is to share information with everybody. I have some, other people have other information. But
this is the reason why he created this Zoom talk tonight.
Okay.
But we still have 25 years to go.
Yeah, we're going to get there, because we're getting into what the cases that evolved in the late 90s that were so crucial. And that's where I'm, if I can proceed, I can be done in a couple of minutes and move it to somebody else who went through some stuff. But
you say you'll make a long story short, but it's not really.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. If you want to organize something, you can run it your way. Come on, man. Let's let the topic proceed. We've thought about this at great length. Okay. Now, okay. So what was interesting about that year, if I can complete this little fable, we holed up with the sisters' buses, Rainbow Turtle and me, and we prepared this thing. Got it printed up. I made them run their generators. I had a laser printer stuck in my van. And this thing, which I'm now screen sharing, was a letter to Randy Moore dated July 7. And there is Paul with all his different signatures at the bottom, nullifying the permit, refusal for cause, and interestingly, pursuant to the provisions of the Uniform Commercial Code, and basically dumping that thing because they didn't keep their word. And so this went to Randy Moore, who was then supervisor of Mark Twain National Forest. He is now the Forest Service chief. So it's an interesting moment, because if anybody knows that this regulation is dysfunctional, as supervisor of Mark Twain National Forest at that time, he was put completely out of the driver's seat by a fraudulent permit that came out of regional office and roadblocks run by law enforcement investigations that turned the thing into a hellhole and wound up getting them sued. And I was in on getting that suit launched with Tracy Park, based on my experience in Hardin County, Illinois, and that was a very successful case. But we'll talk about the roadblock stuff another time.
Been here from
So we had a real interesting bunch of stuff, and then a wave of first round of prosecutions were against people who were perceived to be leaders. Now Wing is on the phone. This is the guy I wanted to encourage to talk about, because he was one of the first recipients of a non-commercial group use citation in Katua gathering in North Carolina. That would have been, I think, August 1996, right after this gathering. Is that true, Stephen? You're muted, so we got to hear you. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, it was right before it, summer solstice,
Oh, it
96.
was June. That's right. Go on. Yeah, how did that come down? You had to go to court. I wound up going to court with you guys that fall. But why don't you tell the story of how they came into the gathering in regional in North Carolina, in Katua, and selected 5 people to cite.
They selected 5 people and got our information, and did not say they were going to prosecute us, but then we all got citations in the mail, including me. When they came, they gave us 24 hours to leave, and I left, but I was tried anyway. So don't fall for that. And my charges were eventually dropped, and with no explanation. The other 4 got I think 8 hours public service, whatever you call that, and the Forest Service allowed us all to come and do the public service. We had probably 25 people out there cleaning up a trail, and we brought a TV news crew with us. But that was just kind of a warning shot. Obviously they could have thrown the book at us, but they were just trying to prove their point and didn't send us to jail or fine us. But that all changed in the next few cases after that.
Yeah, your charges were dropped after the second day of trial. I went down there for that, and my perception was that your actions on site, first of all, you had not been there in the morning when they came and gave notice generally and then personally to a bunch of people about this permit requirement. And then you said, okay, well, if you're giving us 24 hours, I'll leave. So your actions on site, had something to do with your falling outside their prosecution theory of notifying people, making them liable as de facto agents, and then issuing citations. And so that, and also the fact that in court you affirmed your First Amendment right in a distinctive way, and they dropped your case because they didn't want to deal with your issues. The rest of them they had on their basic theory of being able to tag de facto leaders and cite them. And yeah, and if you recall, also the 4 other defendants were agreed. Well, they agreed to take this appeal up to the 4th Circuit, and it was a bad appeal. It got a bad ruling out of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that was one of the things that saddled the ensuing cases with basically the simple proof of you being there constituting a violation. And that's one of the things that came out of the Katua case.
Was that not the same gathering that Joseph was one of the ones cited, and he signed something as Thomas Jefferson?
That was the Allegheny Regional in '97. That was the Allegheny Regional. It was actually Allegheny Regional that fall that was tried the following year, and I went to that case. Actually, I have a fun screen share about that one. You give me a minute. Yeah, here's a fun one. Okay. Give me a second. Yeah. Baxter and Greenfeather got cited at the Allegheny
Yeah.
Regional. And I had been in
Yeah, you're
that
getting into
summer.
the part of the story that I know now.
Right, right. The following year was really.
Just being.
Who's laughing? That year was really eventful because the trial of it was US v. Johnson at Uncle Bill was one of the defendants. Walking Man was one of the defendants. Dan Kavanaugh, I think his name was, and Wayne. And Johnson had nothing to do with the gatherings. He was the first guy who showed up, and because he walked up and talked to the cops what was going on, they got his name and he named him as a defendant. He had nothing to do with anything.
He wrote down their badge numbers.
Yeah, something like that, right?
Yes.
But that case went up on it was really a flawed theory. They tried to defend on a mens rea argument, which meant, how do we know we're committing a crime? Well, the Forest Service came in with really, step-by-step testimony showing how they'd come in and notified people of this requirement. So the argument that they didn't know wasn't going to hold water. That's the case that went up to the Fourth Circuit and was doomed and left. That was the first bad ruling. And the following year was really eventful. I wound up in Florida and made my way, worked on the roadblock stuff. They had 100 kids in jail. I don't want to talk about the roadblock stuff, but I made my way back north, wound up at a Vermont regional. And previously we knew that I was working with Bill Baxter. I'd been in touch with him. I was gathering stuff. I was trying to help his attorney prepare. And that fall I went to the trial in Erie, Pennsylvania. The first time there was a trial in Erie, Pennsylvania. And where's that one? Yeah, here we go. There's something cute. This is actually a print from the newspaper article. I actually have the article somewhere else as a paste up. But yeah, there's me and Baxter going to court together. And newspaper spread about, they covered it pretty well. And his lawyers tried to do a selective enforcement argument that in turn didn't fly. The ACLU had written a memo discouraging that kind of analysis, but Baxter's lawyer, I prepared her, she got transferred. So 2 weeks before trial, there was another lawyer who wasn't ready. Greenfeather's lawyer was a little yuppie who didn't pay attention. He could have taken advantage. I think Greenfeather was either Congressional Medal of Honor winner or next best thing. The guy didn't even play that card in his defense, And so they got pretty much stuck. Because the phone numbers were out there, the contact was there. And I remember the analysis that the U.S. Attorney, John Trisilla, brought into court. Your Honor, if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it's a group or it's a duck. But it's basically trying to show that the elements of people organizing together was proof of an organization. And the clash of paradigms couldn't have been more profound. And they lost as well, And I was I went to the trial. I did my best to help out, but you have no control over what a lawyer does in court for their defendant. And that's been a recurrent problem. So whereas another, then that summer, there was at the gathering in Oregon, a suit got filed out of that. Now, Susan Bernstein's on the phone, on the call. She was actually part of that case, Black v. Arthur. And that was a civil case that they developed out of that. Is Susan on board? And can she talk about that a little bit?
Scotty, no, I believe we've lost Susan. And I've been trying to tip you off in the chat, but you're not checking the chat. Your
Oh.
microphone is rubbing on your collar and we're getting.
Oh, okay.
There we
Yeah,
go.
I got it. It fell down. Okay, fix
Okay,
it.
good. Thank you. Yeah. Was Wing, were you through with your share?
Yeah, I was through.
How about Joni, would you like to share?
We're almost at Pennsylvania 99. I'll set that up, okay? Yeah. Then another case that's not spoken for is from the Arizona 98 gathering. Strider took a ticket, and so did Val. But Strider was a lawyer, and he chose to defend it in a
I did
particular
find,
way.
we do have Susan. I'm sorry.
Oh,
There's
yeah?
so many of us, I lost her. Susan, would you like to share?
Hi.
There she is. Hi.
Yeah, Kara came in and I needed to spend some time with her. So I don't know what your question was.
It's about what you went through in Oregon 97. You were part of that Black v. Arthur lawsuit. And, we're kind of accounting for some of these episodes and the fights that had to be put up. So, yeah, tell us about Black v. Arthur in Oregon 97.
Well, that was a very interesting ticket because they were given our names. Supposedly, the folks that were planning that had spoken with the pardon my memory loss, with the with the big guys. And we were taken to meet those folks, and somehow or another they assumed that therefore we were the ones that were supposed to get tickets. And it was myself and it was Free Feather. It was an awkward time. Free Feather had just lost to Uru, and the last thing she wanted to have to deal with was the politics. But they would not even take Plunker or anyone in her place. So it was kind of an iffy how they got our name. Because I live down here, this is Southern Arizona, I kind of, to tell you the honest truth, I left it in Brian's hands. I believe I was told it was dropped and nothing came from it.
Actually, it was taken up to the Ninth Circuit and got a bad ruling there.
Okay.
And that was,
but aside from that, dealing with the actual resource people on the site, when we were there standing and watching cleanup, the two of them were, their jaws dropped. They were just absolutely amazed at what was going on. And I still remember the woman, I don't remember names, but I remember the woman said, well, if it ever comes to where we need to deal with a situation where we have to deal with a lot of people and move them to the woods, she said, I'm calling 1-800-RAINBOW. I am not calling FEMA. And to me, that was the icing on the cake. That meant more to me than the court case, even though I know the court case was important.
Right on. So that gives another point in 90, that was 97. The following year, as I was trying to explain, Strider got a ticket. He did a pure facial defense. In other words, basically looking at the terms and conditions in the regulation in section 251.56 and stuck very specifically that. I worked with him on the backside. He thanked Garrick as well, that I worked with him on the backside and make sure that no Rainbow family schmooey got into the case, as had occurred a couple times before. That happened in the Katua case, for example. The attorney asked Uncle Bill, "Mr. Latempt, how long you been a member of the Rainbow family?" And in that moment, the case was lost. You want to keep that kind of reference out of these cases. So, but Strider did it's a very specific thing. The terms and conditions are too vague, and the judge agreed. So the judge invalidated his citation. That went to the Ninth Circuit, and they did an interpretive rulemaking saying, well, the public interest clause means protection of natural resources, health and safety, and shared access. That's what public interest means.
Scotty, can I speak to the Strider case?
Yeah, I'm more than welcome. The only thing I want to close with is that they nominally fixed the meaning of that language by interpretive rule, and the Ninth Circuit said, okay, now it's constitutional again. So that's what happened there. Go on.
What you're saying is correct. I went to the court case with Strider, and he was spectacular. The judge asked him questions about how long have you been a member of the Rainbow family? And he said things like, we're all members of the Rainbow family since we were born. That put the kibosh on that kind of questioning. Right. But Strider's argumentation was relentless. No matter what the prosecution said, he said, Your Honor, the regulation is written, says the Forest Service has the discretion to add terms and conditions to any permit as it seems fit. And he said, this is unconstitutional. If somebody signs a permit and they make an agreement to 11 different things, and then the Forest Service can unilaterally put 12, 13, and 14 things on, it makes it impossible for somebody to cooperate or to be a free citizen and so forth. And the Forest Service said, well, the permit system says this and this, and Scotty and Strider said, yes, but Your Honor, just rule on this. If they can add conditions to the permit after it's been signed, that is not constitutional. And if that's not constitutional, I'm not guilty. And the Forest Service made another argument, and Strider said, Your Honor, just focus on this one thing, please. If they can add terms and conditions to this permit after I have signed it, how can I sign something that then I'm bound to conditions that I didn't sign? This is ridiculous. And the Forest Service made another argument, and Strider was relentless, spectacular. And that is how Strider won that case in from Arizona. And exactly what happened was the Forest Service made an interpretive rule, just as you said, Scotty, that said they can't add any terms and conditions after the signature. And by the time the appeal got to the Ninth Circuit, the interpretive rule was in, and the Ninth Circuit said, well, Strider's certainly off the hook, and the regulation stands because it has been fixed by this interpretive rule.
Exactly.
And this very strongly to the 1990 case that we're coming, 1999 case that you're coming to next. So I just want to bring that up because that's very important crux of the 1999 case. Scotty, go on.
Well, yeah, and it's important to realize that he did not, in his defense, it was US v. Linick was the case, L-I-N-I-C-K, Michael Linick. Did not address the core issues that we wound up having to deal with respect to the inability of anyone to represent those assembled. And that was something that got dealt with down the pike. We tried to bring it into the US v. Nenninger case in Missouri. From Ozark Regional in May 98. There's another case that came up that year, another defense. And so it was the following, and I worked on that from the get-go with Tony Nenninger, Goodwater. And I have nothing but nice things to say about the attorney who worked on that. He really paid attention and tried. But we had a 3-month stretch the summer of '99, where after the Pennsylvania gathering and all the events there, in August, I had the trial of Ben Maisel had a case up in Madison. I went up to Wisconsin in August '99. His lawyer tried to argue rainbow beliefs and non-hierarchy, and that court wasn't going to buy it. I tried to get stuff in the record, but went up to the Maisel trial in August. In September, we had the Nenninger trial in Springfield, Missouri, and in October, went up to Erie, Pennsylvania, to help out with the Pennsylvania 3, Garrick, Joni, and Stephen. And Joni's on the call, and she has some colorful fables about what happened in Pennsylvania prior to that led to them getting tickets. Well, what do you got, Joni? Are you alive?
I'm right here.
I love you.
Love you too. Listen, I just want you to know that I've been involved in this permitted from as long as I can remember. So when it came into Pennsylvania, which was a gathering that was in my backyard, it was 305 miles from my door to the gathering site. And I got involved from day one. Thanksgiving Council, work councils, and spring council, and just packed up and moved into the forest. And so it was me, TC, Water Wally, and Ruth, baby Ruth. The 4 of us went into the Forest Service office and said, hello, we're here. We'd like some maps. We're looking, we let them know we were coming, which seemed to be what everybody did. And that's how that went. So because we walked in there, and started doing all this looking around and everything, we were tagged by the incident command and Bill Fox, who was the commander at that time, the incident commander. And so when we got there, we started counseling on the ground. They came in and they handed me a permit, which I refused to sign. And so I became a target along with TC, and they picked me and TC, and they couldn't find Wally and they couldn't find Ruth. So they came after us, and I just evaded them for a lot. I mean, hiding in the back of Pat's van while she trucked me around. It was a pretty wild scene. But they insisted that I be given a ticket. And I kept saying, we're here for peaceable assembly, and there's no way I'm signing a ticket for that. Nobody else would sign either. So one day they were looking for me, and they went up to Garrick and Stephen, who were standing up on the main road. And they said to Garrick and Stephen that they wanted them to come in and bring us out so we could be ticketed. And Garrick, you want to give them your reply? Do you remember?
Are you kidding?
No, you said, I'm not bringing out anybody for you to ticket them for peaceable assembly. And Bill Fox said, well, in that case, we're going to ticket our B team. And Stephen said, who's your B team? And he said, you are Mr. Principal and you are Mr. Beck. And those two got tickets.
Exactly accurate. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And so they immediately said they left, and we thought it was going to be all over with. And then they came back and changed their mind, and they said they wanted me. So I was so I went ahead and I had people talk for me because I wasn't going out. And I said I would come out and I would take a ticket if they left the 4th of July alone, because they threatened to disturb the 4th of July if I didn't come out and get a ticket. And the message to them was I would come out and take a ticket on the 5th of July as long as they left the 4th of July alone. And so we had a peaceable 4th of July. And on the 5th of July, around 4 in the afternoon, after the New York Purple Gang brunch, and I was fortified with a few mimosas. We walked out with me and Susan and a whole bunch of sisters, walked me up to the road, and we went over to where the ticket was going to be given. And Bill Fox did not have the guts to write a ticket. He had the local ranger write a ticket. And so that's how I got my ticket. And so we thought that was it. On July 8th, we went up to Erie to court. And we we proceeded to, we went to court and we had our court case and we got, we scheduled for what, November, Garrick?
Yeah,
Something like. And so we got some great lawyers, pro bono
October.
lawyers. It was October? Okay,
October 22nd or something like that. I got newspaper clippings in the works.
All right.
Here's a picture from October 21 of the three of you in the park.
That's before we lost.
Yeah,
Yes, we're
this was on the way to court.
This is
When was
on
the
our way
last
to
time you
court.
saw a principal in a three-piece suit?
This guy came up and took our picture and we went to court. And then the next day we went to out to breakfast and the papers came in and there we were, front page story.
Right.
So we took all the papers we could get because it's a great picture. I have that on my wall too. We went in and the Forest Service used every single thing against us that they had. I was a focalizer for New York Rainbow at the time. So being a focalizer, I was definitely a tag the leader. They took Michael Nyman's book and used it against us. They took the Always Freeze. They used everything, the documentation like crazy. They were just gearing up for this because they knew that they would win this case because they lost the, Strider's case. And they had this one all set up. And we went through the court case and we went home figuring we'll see what happens. And we had to go back for sentencing, was it? Or we went back again to Judge Cohill. Boy, he was a real company man. He went with the Forest Service all the way, said we were guilty. And then he sentenced us all to 3 months in federal prisons.
Right. I would like to reflect on a certain point in that trial, which I thought was really pivotal. Bear in mind, for everybody else, I was staked out behind the lawyers so I could tap them on the shoulder and let them know if something was up. Bill Fox was on the stand and came up with some hearsay testimony about some counsel somewhere that refused to designate someone to sign. And I'm banging on the lawyer's shoulder and I'm trying to get this complicated message to him. And the moment went by where he should have made an objection to hearsay. But as soon as the judge heard that, what do you mean, counsel? And he decided you all were pulling his leg about this non-organization. And again, the amazing clash of paradigms between the libertarian freaks and the institutional minds just, crossing askew in space. That was his conclusion that you guys, from that point, you guys were it was downhill. And I would note, and I told this, I've shared it with all you guys, you had three of the most eloquent and articulate people you could imagine to talk about how it really went, what it really was about. But tactically, they chose not to testify. This it's a defense strategy that's not uncommon. You impugn by cross-examination the government's case and rest. And it didn't work because the judge was convinced
Hey,
that.
Scotty, can we hear Joni?
Scotty.
Yeah. Well, Joni was talking about it. She can talk more. But
Joni,
that was
Garrick wants to say something. He was there too. Let him say something.
I would say this, in every case, when you win, you say, we took the right strategy. And when you lose, you have to say, we took the wrong strategy. And I will admit, we took the wrong strategy. It didn't work. We didn't win. And, if I had to go back and play that over again, I would have played it differently.
I wanted to testify, remember?
I know. The essence of our case was two things. One, we were not a group, and we wanted the case to apply not just to us like the Texas case had, or some of the other cases, the first Arizona case, the Judge Bilby case. That's really the second Arizona case. We wanted it to apply as a general rule to everybody everywhere in the country, as opposed to just having these regs be targeted at the Rainbow we tried to argue that they were targeted at every citizen's right to assemble. And therefore, we were arguing them as a law of general application as being unconstitutional.
Right.
And so on the one hand, we argued that it was we were not a group, period. We were individuals. And Scotty, you mapped out exactly how that went down badly for us. But the other thing we argued, and this is important, we argued exactly what Strider had argued. We argued that the regulations allowed the government to put additional terms and conditions on a permit after signing, and that this was impossibly unconstitutional, like they said in Strider's case. But the prosecution in its response to this, and this was all argued in the papers and presented to Judge Cohill, they said, well, it's been fixed by the interpretive rule. And our response was, yeah, it's been fixed by the interpretive rule, but we were ticketed before that interpretive rule was in effect. We were ticketed before they fixed the problem with Strider's case. And we argued that right up through the
Supreme Court,
the Court of Appeals, and came on Judge Alito, who's now on the Supreme Court. And just for the storytelling of it, I'll tell what he had to say. He looked and he said to our Reed Lee, who was representing us really beautifully. You know Reed really well, Scotty. And Alito said, I've done my homework here. I see you're a good group of people that cares a lot about everybody. You care for a lot of homeless people. Why don't you just get somebody who's immune from suit to sign the permit? Immune from suit means dead broke, cannot be attacked for liability for money, because that's another thing we argued, that the permit made someone who signed it liable for if somebody poked their eye on a stick, the permit signer would be liable. And Alito said, why don't you just get somebody who's dead broke homeless? His word was immune from suit to sign the permit. And then if they get to, then there's no liability. And Reed was trying to respond to that. What Reed said in response to that was, First Amendment of the United States of America should not depend on somebody being dead broke and homeless. And then they just went on to another topic. In any case, we appealed for up to the Supreme Court, who did not choose to hear the case. And the Circuit Court of Appeals, which Alito was then sitting on in Pittsburgh, they ruled upholding Cohill's judgment. And in regard to the case that Strider made about the interpretive rule, they said, watch this, which was very slick. They said, well, that was in the Ninth Circuit, and we're in a different circuit. So if you want to argue it, take it to the Supremes. And that's what we did, and the Supremes chose not to hear it. And I have to say, if we were back there again, Scotty, honest to goodness, we would play it differently. Joni would play it differently. I would play it differently. Steve would play it differently. But we didn't play it the way we played it because we were fools. We took a strategy, and it was a losing strategy.
I object to that. We were not fools. We thought we were right.
Correct.
And we went right ahead. Do not call yourself a fool over something. We were very strong. We were shocked out of our minds when we were convicted. And then they sent us to federal prisons for 3 months, which is a whole nother story.
Briefly, that's an important point, everybody listening, because essentially the government's position was, look, first we argued with them and asked them to leave the gatherings like they did to Wing and like they did to Feather. And second, we went and we ticketed them, and we just thought if we ticket them and give them fines, but Your Honor, fining and ticketing is not working. We've got to have some jail time to teach these people a lesson. And no, we were not fools.
Right. You have to watch your wording, Garrick. I won't accept that.
I'm with you. That's why the common wisdom altogether.
They did offer us fines and guilt, and we can plead guilty, and we could have gotten out of this, but we decided that we were right, and we thought we'd win, and we went ahead. So Garrick and I both had the same jobs in prison, in different prisons. I was in Danbury, he was in Colorado, and Stephen went out in Oregon to Sheridan. And that was an interesting learning period, but I'd rather not do that again. And I'd rather not see anybody else do it. But after that, we had all kinds of people got arrested and got sent to federal prisons. You know, Barry, Caliph, who else? There was a whole bunch of people that Badger did some time.
Val.
Val did time. So it was from going to jail to going to prison, like a step up. I can't think of anything else to say except that the Pennsylvania gathering came off and nobody really knew much about what was going on. They all had a great time. And we ended up, let's see, we were in Michigan, what, it's 2002? I don't know if anybody even knows this story. We got convicted. They sent us to the Bureau of Prisons. We got fingerprinted, everything. And they told us they'd call us when we had to go in. And we didn't hear for over a year. So we called our lawyers, and our lawyers suggested that we call the Bureau of Prisons. So I called the Bureau of Prisons to find out what was going on. And they had no records of me and Garrick and Stephen being convicted of anything. So we thought for sure, well, what's going on? So we called the U.S. Marshal's office, and the U.S. Marshals couldn't find anything. Those fools dropped our files down behind a file cabinet. And remember, Garrick? They dropped our files. They were down behind a file cabinet. And our lawyers said, you better get them to go look for whatever, because they will find these files 20 years from now and come call you off and throw you in prison. You've got to do it now. And so they finally found them in 2002, in like April of 2002. And they contacted us. And in the 7th, it was the 7th day of July in 2002. We each went into our respective federal prisons. That was crazy, huh? It's quite a story. Anyway, here we are. I hope nobody else has to go through this. I would love to see these regulations written in the General Register, corrected, so we don't have to go through this anymore.
If I can say one more thing here while we're still on 1999 in our case, I want to jump ahead to the present because, and I know Scottie's aiming toward this, the trajectory is heading toward it, but it's a long night. The key thing for me right now is that Randy Moore, who was on site and saw the whole mess in 1996 Missouri,
and he liked us,
and he was in that letter of his that you put up on the screen sharing, Scottie. Randy Moore, in addition to debunking the bogus permit by walking, whatever his name was, in addition to debunking that, in a different paragraph of that same letter, it says one of the reasons this so-called permit is invalidated is because the Forest Service has failed to live up to its obligation for open access to the forest for this event. And that's where you took the Tracy Parks case, which was a huge win and a great thing you did there, Scottie. I'm sorry you didn't talk more about that. But that fellow who wrote that, who was offended by the LEO's blockading of the roads and not letting people have public access to his Mark Twain National Forest, which he was the forest supervisor. That man is now the head of the Forest Service. And opportunity in these upcoming months to get that regulation changed. And that's, Scottie and everybody else, is why I'm interested in participating in this Zoom and discussing these things so that somehow we can find a way to move ahead and get a regulation change that will make us be legal, help us be legal in the eyes of the law without having to have somebody be our representative or our agent or our appointed mullah.
Right on.
And I'm in on it too.
Oh.
Yeah, I wanted to reserve that topic. Yeah, this is about the petition to amend the regs that went in to the Department of Agriculture, Office of pardon me, Natural Resources and Environment in September to actually change the rule. It's basically the regulation we would get if we won one of these big kahuna cases, because they have to allow a public assembly to be authorized. The current regulation does not. I wanted to reserve that topic for a Zoom in a month or so when we know more about how the rulemaking process is going to go. But we do have that strategy on the table, and it does enable some affirmative tactics going into Colorado, which we can
I would
talk
like-
about later.
I just want to say, because I haven't heard it mentioned yet, there was a poor period of time during these regs thing where we were offered the opportunity to be grandfathered in and just the rainbow gathering. Remember that, Garrick? I think you were there at the time. They offered to grandfather us in and give us this little permit thing, but it would only have been for the rainbow gathering, and we wanted for anybody. That's why we turned that down.
And that's why the regulation has to be written to enable bunch
Anybody.
of folks who want to assemble voluntarily to do so. And that's the way it's crafted. Yeah, that was all really momentous. In the following year, Plunker tried a tactic, writing him a letter saying there were going to be a gathering in Montana, and he wrote them a letter saying we should be authorized, and he wound up getting cited as a result of his letter. An interesting turn of events. He initially was convicted, and he was on the door of the jailhouse, I think in Washington, in Tacoma or something like that, when word came that the motion to reconsider had been taken up by the court, that in fact his letter was an application for authorization. And then they went back in and he started arguing all sorts of rainbow family stuff and got the issue complicated. My theory in retrospect was, and I tried to advise him of this, take the win. If your letter, your personal letter, counts as an application and they did not respond granting or denying within 48 hours, deem granted. That's by rule. And they could have taken that win, but he got another case all embroiled in the court, in the court. Rainbow family shtick goes up to the Ninth Circuit, and there was another bad ruling that came out of Barry's case in Montana in 2000. And this gets us to the next era, which really was an escalation, and it started in Ocala after my roadblock injunction expired, because that's another story about the demise of the Ocala Defense Project and the fund and the roadblock case being subverted there. But in 2001, Malcolm Jowers became incident commander, and he started the mass citation tactics in Ocala. And subsequently, he did the same thing in Idaho. And I didn't get to Idaho for a bunch of personal reasons and whatever. But what I could do in that phase, I did this in Florida in February. I sent a Freedom of Information request with a lot of dirty details asking about what these police actions were about. And I knew sending it to the supervisor of the National Forest in Florida to get escalated to the regional office in Atlanta, and discovered that a funny thing happens when honchos start having to ask questions they don't want the answers for. The shit stops. And so that kind of worked, and things cooled out in Ocala. And then the following summer, I tried the same thing. The same shit was going on in Idaho. I sent a similar down and dirty FOIA request out there. It landed in Salt Lake City at the regional headquarters there. And strange enough, the shit stopped. I said, wow, this is pretty good jujitsu if we could perfect this art. But other folks will have some stories about what went on in those years from 2002 through 2004. Garrick was forced, and I think he can talk a little bit about this. He was pushed. He can explain the pressures and the duress involved, but he was pushed into signing a permit in Utah 2003. Because the heat was on, things were getting escalated in that time. And Garrick, can you talk a little bit about your Utah misadventure?
Yes, I'll be brief. In Utah, they just finished Gulf War I, and the people we know inside the government, and we know people in there who are maybe not connected to the Forest Service, but who are, in positive positions, supportive positions, housing authority for underprivileged issues of law in housing injustice, and other folks got to us and said, they're really planning to bring in a militaristic kind of thing under the Unified Command System, which is a system wherein they take a region on the map and everybody within that region, whether you're a librarian or a traffic cop, or if you're working for the government, if you're working in any kind of position, not just federal, state, and local, you are under the Unified Command structure. And this is one of those secret government scenes. I mean, it's not so secret anymore. It's all been outed. But the Unified Command structure was used in Utah in '03. And they brought in the largest force of federal agents that they'd ever had, 125 people. And they brought in all the deputized people from all the counties around, and they prepared a strike force, and they had maps up on the wall about how they were going to come into the gathering from all the different sides and how they were going to start taking out this kind of like fat kids, dirty kids camp up at the north end of the gathering first, because they thought those folks would be the most trouble and they wanted to attack them first. And they had an entire strategy mapped out about how they were going to do that. And we had a discussion about this, and they were ready to go in the next day. And in a lot of discussions on site, I said, I'd rather take the flak and under duress of invasion, sign this permit and be able to document everything. And of course, there was the usual promise, you just sign this thing and everything, all your problems will go away. And this piece was signed under duress, and none of the problems went away. They continued harassing people on the road. And there's a huge documentation that I made that's available about all the problems, all the oppressive things that were done on the road, inside the gathering, the dog incident, the fire incident, on and on and on, including them riding their horses around after the 4th of July meditation, like some Cowboys and Indians movie. And I filed all of that as an objection and said, this is not working, but it staved off a real invasion that the likes of which we never would have seen before. And they never got it together to try to pull that off again. And I did that partly because I thought I could take the flak for that better than practically anybody. And as Stephen said, if it wasn't you, Garrick, I would have taken you to court, but I don't want to take you to court. And later on, as we'll come to the case in New Mexico, 2009, Stephen did take the people to court, signed the permit in that year. I'm jumping ahead here, but in that case, 2009, Stephen took the case against the two women who signed a permit for us. And the judge essentially said, there's no way with 8,000, 9,000 people up there who are objecting to this permit that you could possibly sign this permit on their behalf and represent them, especially one of those people had never been to a gathering before, and the other person had been to one gathering before and had no idea how things operated, how the water operated, how the parking operated, how Shawnee Sena or COM operated, or how the councils operated, or how the kitchens operated. They had no idea how any of this worked. They just said, well, how on God's earth can you represent these people if you don't know anything about how the operation goes? And they sort of shrugged their shoulders, and the judge said it's completely illegal for you to have signed on behalf of these people. And that was New Mexico 2009. And there's a part of me that wishes Stephen had dragged me to court. And I would have said, yeah, I don't know how on earth I could represent these people either. It's everything I could do to represent myself. But that's what happened in 03. And in 04, there was a ghost signer. Somebody signed the permit who was not on site and had not even been to California. And as a result, they amended the regs to say a signer has to be on site. So there's this whole game, not game isn't the right word, but this whole strategy of, Strider wins his rule. Somebody it's ruled that somebody who's not there or who has no intention of being there can't sign. So they change the rule again. This rule, this 1994 regulation, Scotty, has been amended and interpreted, and they have moved the goalpost on this rule half a dozen times.
We'll get to the
Garrick.
New Mexico thing. I'm firsthand experience with that because I kind of built the case.
Scotty,
But, the era that we're getting to, I want to talk about 2004.
Question.
Permit was signed by Jeff Klein's secretary in Washington, D.C. Jeff Klein knew that the then chief of the Forest Service, Mike Dombeck, he was trying to play an inside game. And so at the point where we are in negotiations with the Undersecretary of Agriculture, Mark Ray, trying to steer things. And some folks will recall the meeting that took place with Ray and other honky honchos in the Haight-Ashbury in January 04, which launched the whole part of a whole change the regs move that we got onto. We were having discussions about this, what we can do to put something in front of them to alter this regulation. And right at that point, we could have pushed for some kind of operating plan volunteer thing. I had a letter that went to Ray, but at that point he had a signer in his pocket for California. And so the California permit was signed 3,000 miles away for no damn reason. And that dulled, kind of distracted the thing. But I want to talk a little bit about the Change the Regs movie that got started back then, because there were conference calls with the Undersecretary of Agriculture. I remember John Twist, who weaseled himself into a position of head of law enforcement, would be sitting in those conference calls. And I remember telling him, I ain't talking to law enforcement about any matter of policy, and you ought to leave the room. But he stayed. He came up as a player later on. We'll talk about what happened in Wyoming in 08. But during those years, we were trying to get a petition, some kind of rule change underway. Karen put something in that got the process kind of half started, and it needed to be amended, but Twist put the kibosh on the whole thing, and that initiative in 2004 dissipated. And that kind of brings it to the next gathering was in West Virginia in 2005. And that is a scene where there was a site near Elkins, which the cops blockaded, kept people out of there. They were backed up in small encampments in different parts of a big area of woods. And then they went through the small encampments, started issuing group use citations to everyone there, saying, well, you 20 people are connected to those 40 people and those 30 people over there. So you're all together. So that's how they tallied up more than 75 in the woods with people in small camps in different locations, because they were blockaded from the site. Then they said, you got to go south to the Cranberry Glades site, 70 miles south. The gathering was steered there. They set up tribunal in the little nature center across the road. The gathering was right on a major road. Set up tribunals for steering all these several hundred, like 300 people were cited, for group use violations in West Virginia, based on this bogus theory that people prevented from entering a gathering site in small encampments could be lumped with other people. And they decide that there is a group that should have signed a permit and they're all liable. So that was a real horror show. But we found a lawyer in Elkins and got John McCall. I don't know if John's on in on the Zoom tonight. I hope he is, because John teamed up with a lawyer in Elkins, and I got another couple of lawyers out of a firm out of Wheeling. And I had to go to those proceedings as at the Nature Center as a legal observer. I told the magistrate Judge Call outright that they had waived jail sentences up front, and thereby they were denying people access to counsel, to court provided counsel. And so they were forced either to take a plea and pay him off. Most people did that. Some people tried to defend themselves without any preparation. There was incredible abridgment of due process as these people cold turkey walking into court with a bunch of co-defendants they didn't even know, and no opportunity to bring witnesses, trying to defend their right to gather. Scads of convictions. But we had appeal forms down there and got 9 appeals going out of those cases. And John and this other lawyer in Elkins took a bunch, and these other guys in Wheeling took 4 more. And we won those appeals. It was a shitload of work, but they backed out. The government backed out of those cases. They all of a sudden the judge says, well, there seems to be a problem with the tape transcripts of these proceedings, and it's a matter of criminal law. If you have no appealable record, the convictions can't stand. So he used that out. Well, I know that John did a kick-ass job in impugning the grounds of these prosecutions as a matter of criminal law and criminal process, exposed the flaws. And the other guys in West Virginia, in Wheeling, they plagiarized a brief I did on the legal issues, an amicus brief that I worked on for Tony Nenninger's case that never got into the court. But they used that, and they saw, the feds saw what kind of arguments were coming at them. We got 9 convictions overturned. And it's an interesting thing. We would like for the court to have dealt with the issues that we presented, but the fact that they ducked the issues meant they were really good. And we really established well that there is no legal capacity in an assembly for anyone to act in an agent capacity and sign for others, and that no group was embodied. This was getting to the real issue. And so this was one of the turning points in the fight, I feel, because it took a couple of years, but even not getting a substantive ruling on the issues we presented, that was actually kind of a good sign, because Office of General Counsel in DC was watching that stuff. And incidentally, we found out how the feds learned where the gathering was supposed to be from the sworn testimony of the incident commander, Tim Lynn, in court, because he was asked that question, how they knew to blockade that site near Elkins. He said Jeff Klein told them where they're going to be. That's something to hang your hats around. Jeff Klein was the same guy who instigated the California signer the year before. That's another fable, but that was one of the turning points. And then in Colorado 06, Donnie got up and at him in Colorado. I couldn't get there. I was more effective mustering help from the backside. I got some lawyers from that region near, I forget it's kind of the northern tier across there. I forget the name of the towns, but I found some lawyers, and
Donnie is here.
Yeah.
Donnie, would you like to share?
Yeah, I want to hear Donnie's experience from Colorado, because we worked together long distance for several months. Let's hear the stories, Donnie.
Okay, I'm here. Sorry. We're talking Colorado 92.
06.
Okay, yeah. That was the year they put a full-on assault on us. They really came after us with everything they had. The most pernicious thing was that they targeted our crews. They went after every medic they could find. They went after every lawyer they could find. They went after anybody they could find, really. They had us in what was it, a fire station, some kind of, just
Firehouse
a little
trials.
it was like a volunteer fire department kind of thing.
Yep.
And at the time they were getting this TSA grants or Homeland Security grants that allowed them to go to a place and say, hey, we can fence your place and, give you all these other security things. And they came in and they built a fence around this thing for the locals. And they made it a whole prison. I'm sure they have it on their list for use in future times. But they, let's see, they had a blockade on us, and hundreds of rainbows stormed out of the gathering and surrounded them trying to do the blockade. There's a good video of it. So then they got really mad, and they just really came after us. There were hundreds of arrests. Everybody had mandatory appearances. We had to be at that stupid garage. That's a whole thing that I apologize that I must have fallen asleep for a lot of this discussion. So, I kept winning cases though. The judge was kind of fair. And, then I got arrested. They came and they made it clear to me that, hey, Donnie, everybody, they're all going to come back and they're all going to watch you get arrested. Because I stood up in court and I won all these cases. And mostly because the guys didn't put the jurisdiction, they didn't put the venue on the ticket. And the judge ruled that that was jurisdictional. And he kept throwing cases out for me on that basis. And they kept screwing it up because the cops weren't trained that they had to put that happened in the national forest on the ticket. Let's see that was the year that I have to confuse all my years here, but it was just day after day of court. We had court on Saturday, July 3rd and Sunday, July 4th kind of thing. We had, it was totally unheard of kind of stuff. That was Stone. Oh, yeah. Is that the year Stone got arrested?
Yes.
Yeah. And because he was the medic, and he actually stopped to help our accident people, and the LEOs were harassing them, and that the guy needed medical attention, and Stone was trying to give medical attention, so they arrested him for that. They came in and they busted Jane for her medical kit. They were after Rob Savoy. Let's see, I think he had the audacity to actually bring a antenna to the gathering or something like that. They went after everybody they could find that was, a leader, and tried to harass us away from that gathering. One funny part was, at the end, when it's all over, I had to go through it myself. I had to go through the whole perp walk and this and that. I'm sitting there trying to defend people, and they're trying to give me a gathering ticket. And I was livid, I was furious. And I was, so I was a pretty good public defender at that moment.
Right.
in the end, I kind of made it friends with the magistrate. You know, he kind of liked what I did. He appreciated my position. And we actually, we actually got this big Denver attorney. One of our multimillionaire friends stood up for Rob. Thought, them harassing Rob was ridiculous. And hired this big name Denver attorney. And as soon as I said in court his name, like you could see I'll go, oh, you got filled the book, and oh my God, and everything kind of changed at that moment because they wouldn't let us observe. They wouldn't let observers in the courtroom, and we basically shut them down on that. And there was a whole big discussion about that with that lawyer.
There was a lawsuit, Donnie.
Yeah, it was actually filed. That's right.
I got a sidebar to plug in on that because I was involved in pulling in attorneys. There was guys in Denver who were a guy named Lane, I remember, who was really highly placed, and these other guys. One of the lawyers was named Mayo, and we wound up with a case called Mayo v. Krogstell. Krogstell was one of the IC geeks, little kind of scrawny redheaded guy. But there was a suit that the lawyer brought because the cop had kept the lawyer out of the court. Okay. And his defendant. And so we had a Sixth Amendment lawsuit going. Sixth Amendment is your right to public trial, which was being denied. And that came to a hearing, which I heard. I got the audio on this thing. I tried to convey to these guys what they were sitting on was basically IC, Incident Command, creating these executive tribunals. And we posed the question, what is the authority of that proceeding with respect to the authority of the district court? They brought in the order from West Virginia the year before. They didn't have authority to run that proceeding. And we had them on this thing. Judge gets on the phone with the magistrate and the incident commander. They say, oh yeah, we'll put chairs in the court. We'll let people in. And the lawyer dropped the case. I go, oh no, you don't drop a case when you got them by the balls. But so Mayo v. Crogsdale went for a couple of weeks and had him by the balls on a Sixth Amendment violation on the mandatory appearance in the firehouse. And we let him off the hook. But Donnie then talked about the fact that a number of people said, no, I want to defend myself. And you had a bunch of appearances late in July and we won them all. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Another benefactor gave us a little bit of money, and it allowed me to fly out to Denver to defend everybody. And we started to defend ourselves and ended up with this compromise deal where I think we made it $20 a ticket, and we took care of everybody's ticket. And which was really good because there were like 90 no-shows that would have gotten arrest warrants.
Right.
And but in the end, the magistrate says to me, I was at the first rainbow gathering, and I don't know if I was dead asleep, I guess, but the story about Judge Dave and the rainbow, there's a book on it even.
Yeah, Dave Santel.
Dave Santel.
Yeah.
He was Dave Santel's assistant when Judge Dave came out to the rainbow gathering years before. And I thought that was just hilarious. That the guy later turned out to be our magistrate, and he was actually a little sympathetic for us. It was pretty good. But that was Colorado. It was awful. And in the end, the Forest Service got very little out of it except training, which is all this was about. But they had teams of U.S. federal marshals in training who were doing an identity class. And, the idea was to issue these tickets in mandatory appearances, and then people wouldn't show up to the mandatory appearance, and that gave them an excuse to arrest people at the gathering. And
Yeah.
for
And
several
warrants.
years, what's that?
And warrants.
Yeah, they issued immediate warrants, and then they come right out to the gathering and look for everybody. And with these teams of U.S. Marshals, and it was an identification class. I followed these guys around, and I watched them. They were all keeping score about how many of the fugitives they could each identify. Oh, that went on for several years. That grant that they got for coming into the gathering and training marshals on us. Colorado was awful. It was a mess of a year, and okay, that's all I got.
Well, I would qualify that because we also showed that we could get some action and kick back. We got other lawyers into the court, and all these cases that got dismissed on the obvious flaws in the prosecution and animus behind it, all that kind of started piling up. I want to get us through this era, and we can entertain some questions in a bit, but the following year, Arkansas was another movie. We didn't know. It was interesting. We thought the gathering that year was going to be in Texas, and at the last minute, the scouts showed up in Arkansas. So all this preparation I did with the Texas ACLU was for naught. And I had to find the Arkansas ACLU, and I found a guy in Fayetteville we went to see, try to get something underway. We'll spare that story. Donnie and Steven showed up, and it didn't get off the ground. But that year, Nenninger, Tony Goodwater was coming out of law school. He filed a lawsuit that went to Fort Smith, didn't fly. He tried to appeal. They wouldn't look at it. I actually helped him prepare all that stuff. He landed here with his dog and box of rotten food, and we went to work. But he was not an attorney yet. And so you can't take a case on appeal into a federal circuit court if you're not a lawyer. So they just tossed it out. He did a lot of research. He came up with a new theory of hybrid rights, where you have different First Amendment affected rights involved in the complaint, and a huge body of documentation, which I've got. So but his case was thrown out by the clerk because he wasn't a lawyer. And then the next year, we know what happened with the movie in Idaho. They were intensive there again. I couldn't get there, but I was able to notify the ACLU of Wyoming early in June that some shit was going to happen. And when it came down, we know the story about the cop riot at Kitty Village on the 3rd of July, and the people busted there, and Fonte's infamous purple pack that he was giving weed away. But subsequently, the ACLU of Wyoming did its own investigation. I'm going to show you. Yeah, I've got it up. Okay, I'm going to share that screen because the ACLU of Wyoming did a full investigation, and I'm going to show that thing. Yeah, here it is. This is a little clumsy. I'm sorry it's so slow, but there we are. ACLU issued a report in October 06, which skewered the Forest Service. And John Twist, who had actually called for the outlawing and ending of the gatherings, what happened as a result also is there was an inspector general's investigation that kicked loose about what the Forest Service had done, basically firing non-lethal weapons in Kitty Village and escalating that situation. I also went to court with Dale Kellogg, who was tased and tortured the day before in the parking lot. We got some of those cases beat, but this really skewered the Forest Service's reputation, and the inspector general's investigation got John Twist to retire to avoid having to answer any questions. So he left, and that set things up for the following year in New Mexico. And that was the year, see, where's this other thing? Okay. That was the year, you had the all sorts of gestures going on with the Forest Service in New Mexico. Garrick was in on some of that. I got the FOIA. They were trying to set something up, but they chose these two ladies who, again, Jeff Klein had put up to be signers, straw dog signers in New Mexico. As a result of which, well, Stephen and I had talked about this a lot. No, I don't want this. Excuse me. It had been speculated on for a long time that, like, technically someone who signed was liable for fraud. Okay. And we decided to proceed because New Mexico has a law that says all contract issues in a state are within the jurisdiction of the state courts. And we had the infamous case, Sedlaco v. Law, or Principal v. Law. It just sounds so euphonious, you know. I'm going to bring that up in a second because we sued those signers not for their shirts, but for a declaratory ruling from the court to the effect that these people had no ability to represent those assembled. And it took another year. We got that filed late in 2009, and it took a while for this thing to ripen and get them served. I found the attorney. The attorney was an old girlfriend of mine from Chicago. I knew from the National Lawyers Guild. I got the defendants served in bizarre, creative ways. Jay Marks, Ellen, you'll remember our beloved brother Jay Marks arranged to get Lindsay Dearborn served in DC. And, you know, we had to pull some tricks to do that. But as a result, the First Judicial District Court in Santa Fe came up with this order. Did it disappear? I'll bring it up again. I don't know why. Okay, here we are. Yes. Plaintiff's motion for summary judgment against Lindsay Dearborn and motion for summary judgment against Lisa Law are granted. The signatures of Lindsay Dearborn and Lisa Law in regard to the Assembly of June and July in 2009 in the state of New Mexico, commonly known as the annual Rainbow Gathering, are void and null. Defendants had no legal authority to sign on behalf of the Rainbow Gathering. And defendants Lindsay Dearborn and Lisa Law have no legal authority to sign any documents on behalf of plaintiff. They're enjoined from signing stuff on behalf of the plaintiff and those assembled, etc. This ruling, which we pulled off in New Mexico, broke the back of the fallacy of this regulation, that it could grab someone from an assembly, make them agents, create a fiction about some kind of imaginary group that was supposedly to hold a permit that didn't exist. And this vindicated a case that we never got to court from Vermont Regional in '97. I wanted to bring this up for the fun of it, just to illustrate this point. I landed after being in Florida for months, fighting and preparing a roadblock and going to DC and then going to Vermont Regional. A case came out of it, US v. Wolf. His name was Greg Wolf. He's known as Gray Wolf. He got the ticket. There's some fun stories about it. And it took great doings. What the Forest Service did there, they came in on a Saturday morning with a permit saying New England Rainbow Family. Somebody signed this. No, that thing doesn't exist. You can't have that on there. They come back that afternoon with the same permit. That's scratched out and it says the Granville Group. And they want somebody to sign for this completely made up legal entity that was fabricated for the purposes of compliance. And I stayed up in Burlington, Vermont that summer of '97, preparing for a case that would have nailed it down right from the get-go, the decisive issue. And then 3 weeks before trial, the U.S. attorney looked at, said, this is garbage, and he dropped the case. So this is one of the cases that never got to court. I was dying to get a good ruling in the First Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Granville Group case never came to trial. So this is an issue that we've been trying to fight and establish for a long time. In the Nenninger trial, there was a critical juncture. We had this orchestrated. His lawyer asked him on the stand, Mr. Nenninger, if you were to sign the permit, what would happen? And Tony said, I would be committing fraud. And then I looked at the transcript later on, they screwed it up, but that was in the trial. We've been trying to get this issue before a court in a federal court. And it turns out we get a decisive ruling out of a state court in New Mexico, was finally issued in 2011. But the key thing here is that the filing of this lawsuit, government had nothing to do with it, but they knew about it. These are Jeff Klein's friends. He tattled, I'm sure. And the next year we go to Pennsylvania in 2010, forest supervisor comes up and said, oh no, we're going to have an operating plan. And can you see that? And this was the 2010 operation and maintenance plan for the 2010 Peaceful Assembly. There's the signature of Leanne Martin, the forest supervisor, dated 6/28. And all of a sudden, they didn't want to fight anymore. And I think the series of cases that we worked on and the situations we were able to fight back on, they realized we had stuff that they couldn't beat in a fair trial. And all of a sudden, they didn't want to fight anymore. So in 2010 was a real turning point, because they said, okay, here's an operating plan. Now I went to Leanne Martin. When I was there, I addressed her politely and I said, can you clarify one thing for me? Did you happen to issue a permit to the file behind this? She said, no. I said, so this is the authorization. She said, yes. I said, thank you. That is the setup for the solution. And once again, by happenstance, good spirit and accident and whatever, they got it right in 2010. And that was the harbinger of maybe some good stuff. They were started doing operating plan, but then they started backsliding. And so what we've now seen in recent years, they stopped doing operating plans. They do these design criteria documents. We're trying to figure out why they did that. I analyze these things. They're adding more contractual terms to the thing. And they're still trying to engage Rainbow Family. I know that then they're asking people to sign stuff and we can get special permits. Val was subjected to that in South Dakota, for example. There are probably some other stuff from before that, but I want to jump to there. And I've kind of figured out that the only reason they invent a whole new kind of thing as extra terms and conditions, at the same time, they've been declaring gatherings illegal. So then, oh, they're not bothering us about the permit. We're cool. A lot of people are lulled into complacency and a false sense of security. But in fact, we're being politically set up because they've been declaring these gatherings illegal, and all it takes, and this regulation is still on the books. During this time, one big issue came up in South Dakota. They prosecuted Val for setting up a water system for the council. And we went to war on that. I worked with the federal defender who was appointed to represent him. He was a pretty good guy. And we beat that rap. We established, it was a real interesting case, and we established that there is, they can't impede someone who is trying to, provide health and service to other people assembled and mess with the infrastructure in that way. And so they know that that they can only go so far. But then 2 years later they stole a bunch of water pipe in Oregon. They put up road closures in Vermont in 2016, and this goes to IC, Incident Command. I've been collecting the delegations of authority over the years. That means they declare these gatherings to be emergencies, non-natural emergencies was the term that came out of the region in New Mexico from those FOIAs. Somewhere as a matter of standing policies that enables a delegation of authority from the proper Forest Service and civilian employees to LEI, law enforcement investigations, as a lead agency. And that is going to be the next problem with law enforcement running First Amendment policy. That's what First Amendment was written to avoid. But with respect to this regulation, we're in a difficult stalemate right now because it's still on the books, it's still enforceable. They're cranking up political points against the gathering on the backside and avoiding any kind of confrontation in court. And that's kind of the reason why I said, okay, let's go to war and force this to a political conclusion through a petition to amend the regulation under the Administrative Procedure Act, under the right to petition to change a rule under the Administrative Procedure Act. And so we have that thing in play now. And, I probably skipped over some fun stuff. I would love to hear some infill, but, that gets us to the situation that the gatherings face now. And my feeling is that if we were to, like I said, win the big kahuna court case, the regulation would not go away. There is any challenge to their ability to regulate is futile and is a losing argument. But the regulation has to enable a public assembly of folks who voluntarily go to public forum space to share ideas. There has to be a way of authorizing it. The current regulation on its face precludes authorization of individuals assembled. That's what we need to change, to take away the enforceable offense of being on public land to speak. And that's, we'll talk more about that. I want to kind of open it up to anyone who has some episodic stuff or ideas to infill. Maybe now is the time to go to broad discussion. Anybody who has observations or questions. First of all, any questions about the factual stuff that's gone on and some of the stuff that's been covered to explain how we got to this point. I want to open it to Q&A first. Dana, are you in a position to see who's raising their hand or who has ideas or who wants to be unmuted or whatever?
I'll get unmuted.
I can't see who's raising hands. But I just got to say to you, this isn't exactly a question, but I just got to say to Garrick, if RJ and I had known back about the turn of the century about that business that happened, and I think you said it was 1980. If we had known that then, our strategy towards approaching Ocala would have been somewhat different. We still would have had the Sakharov situation to deal with. But if we had known then what you just told me, that would have been something for us to chew on. I'm muted.
May I?
Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Greg.
Now, the rights that we are exercising are rights directly guaranteed by the Constitution, and that's Justice's decision in Texas. if we move along that line, and we in fact are a pro-peace, pro-healing gathering that has a non-sectarian interfaith meditation for world peace, and a vegan, vegetarian main circle, they don't have any complaints except for a little skinny dipping and some pot smoking. But if we present ourselves as loud and in the police's face and are aggressive towards law enforcement people who are simply there for the same reason we're there, to protect our national resources and constitutional rights, then we'll go afoul. That's sort of a general statement. I'm done.
Thank you, Greg.
I don't know how to raise my hand.
Go ahead, Water.
Greg, that would make all kinds of sense if the people whose space we were in were the rangers and the folks whose job is to protect the land and the resources. But that's not who we have a problem with. We have a problem with the wannabe cops who like to wear their guns and push people around and don't recognize that anybody but them has any rights at all under the Constitution. And I insist that the only way to deal with fascism is to get in their face.
Chet, the redheaded LEO, we all know Chet. He and I had a lot of bad encounters, but then he came to a Gary Stubbs gathering, which was on a Pitt River sacred area. And I was sort of defending the Native Americans. And you know, when there's the common ground, when you can find common ground where the person is normally your opponent, that's a key thing. Thank you. It's nice to see your face. No matter what, show love.
All right, so I'd like to welcome John McCall to the call. We did
Hi, Dana.
already cover a little bit about what happened in New Mexico, where you're a real lawyer and have done lots of awesome work for the family, and you are so appreciated. And it's great to see you here tonight. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to share.
I'm under the weather, but Donnie's a real lawyer. I just play one on TV sometimes.
That's my line.
So yeah, I'm a little out of it, but it's good to see that everybody got to get together to talk about these things. This is God. This was one of my great goals, was to go to law school and in the 90s and work on this, and to one day meet the famous or infamous Stephen Principle, and who I guess I probably worshipped from afar in the 80s and 90s until I grew to hate him up close on occasions. you know, the amazing things that I learned from Ben Maisel, who I just consider one of the greatest legal minds in the history of the United States, and someone who's maybe been underlooked over time. And I don't have too much to say about. I think that this has been one of the most ephemeral legal quests in my career, because every time we come up with an idea or a winning formula of some sort, the circus moves on to the next town. And that's happened over and over again for us. But it's also something that keeps the feds on their toes as well, because they have to try to hit the same moving target that those of us who have tried to do legal work on some of these issues have tried to hit as well. And I've learned a lot of things. I think most of the lawyers that I've known, other than Donnie, who've come into the picture, have always had some sort of angle or legal agenda, be it sovereignty or First Amendment, religious rights, or peaceable assembly of under some other rubric. It's interesting to see how people come in, like myself, with certain somewhat preconceived ideas, maybe a legal strategy, and then how we have to be flexible and adjust to embrace the love of the circle and its impermanence, its fluidity, and the ephemeral nature of Rainbow and the gatherings. So that's been a wonderful experience for me. I know Scottie had wanted me to talk about, West Virginia was an example where I think there actually was a strategy that we were tossing around to do these 75 people or less sort of groupings, and to call each one of them a separate gathering to kind of thwart the enforcement on the regs. And there actually was a little bit of success on that concept. And then there was a lot of work on briefs that were done. Spent a lot of time sitting in the bizarre kangaroo court in West Virginia, in the whatever building that was that we were in, and watching people get ushered in, and federal judge sort of sitting in this. It was a kangaroo style, the way the whole thing was conducted, and we saw that in Colorado too after that. But there was a tremendous amount of research and work and discussions with the attorneys in West Virginia that were working with us. And it's always amazing that the local attorneys who show up, like what happened in New Mexico and what happened in West Virginia, that's always amazing to me, that we always are able to appeal to the better nature of lawyers. So, I think we had some success there. Some of the legal theories that we were hoping to argue were sort of thwarted, as Scottie's probably told you, by sort of a procedural back end maneuver by the court. But we were able to help some people there, and that's always a good feeling. So, there's lots of funny stories. I've never been in court with anybody like Donnie Wirtschafter. I think I've seen him in court in his pajamas, maybe, and slippers. Not quite barefoot, but it was it was really mind blowing. It was kind of like wavy gravy, all, in the legal process, and that was really cool for me, who's always been in a suit and tie and all that kind of stuff. So this has been a lot of fun, and I'm sure there's more to come. And it's nice. I remember meeting Scottie, I think it was in '99. And I think I met Scottie and Ben, and I don't know if Barry was there, Judy Appleseed was there. And that was when this part of this started for me for real. I had been in law school and following things on email and stuff like that, but meeting people and getting involved, it's just an amazing, fun process, and it's a wonderful thing for all of us who've been able to participate in this legal trail of smiles along the way. So anyways, that's all I have to say. I'm sorry, I'm pretty whacked out tonight.
Yeah, thank you, John. I shared like the complementarity of these two legal teams in West Virginia, and all the preparation that went into the distinctive arguments that were lodged from either direction. And your analysis skewered the whole premise of these prosecutions. The Wheeling guys, I forget their name, really made compelling legal arguments, based on, and they listened to the work we'd done. It took a matter of accumulating all this research over these years and being able to share it with lawyers. And sometimes they listen, sometimes. But that was a load of work that took a number of months, and it ain't a seasonal sport. It takes continuity, and we carried that stuff through in West Virginia. And what I shared before you got on, John, was that those rulings, I think, were really instrumental in turning the tide in those really difficult years. And balls to the wall, no guts, no glory. And we have contemplated some bigger strategies. I think one of the things you can attest to, this stuff is really hard to do. The circus lands in another town, another state, in a remote place every year. And it's the hardest stuff to do because you have to start over. You have to find local support. You have a new fact situation. Things happen quickly, and it's very rare that you can get to court quickly enough to make a difference with what you're doing now. You've seen a bunch of that a bunch of times, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's not like court is. It's not like we're trying to get a lawyer to go to the courthouse. We're trying to get a lawyer to go 2 hours from town out to some bus garage to do a court thing.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That's one of the things that anybody who gets involved in this coming up, in time, should be aware of how much of a process that is. It's like starting all over every year, starting all over. Except, people like yourself, Scottie, you've got forms that people can fill out, and you've got a spot at info where people can go, and those kinds of things are invaluable, from what I've seen.
We've learned the hard way in terms of what it takes to get usable information in real time. I have staked out as a legal observer because I've seen that role change situations on the ground immediately, changes the winds. And that segues into an investigative role where I had to know what kind of facts were going to be relevant to these issues. This is true both of the permit issue and the roadblock stuff that we've dealt with. Chasing the cops around with a limp. It's a load of fun, but it's really hard to generate the facts and get things loaded up in a timely manner, and then it's over and people scatter. And if you can get past past their nicknames and find out who they are and get them to actually stand up. Oh, there are plenty of stories about people who were waving their arms about the bad things that happened, but it came down to sticking out a fight. You know, ain't that many willing to stand in those shoes.
I felt
So
really bad about the people in Georgia that got kind of left behind. A lot of people from North Carolina that had come down, and you know, the group of people who were on the herbal walk. I thought they had a pretty good civil rights claim, especially the family with the child that was traumatized by the Leos. You know, that was one that seemed to get away.
Oh yeah.
There was a lot of good focus. People came and gave their story, and we recorded it and everything, but it got
that
away.
was really powerful. Georgia was a situation, Georgia 18. However, the situation land there, and it turns out Sakura was involved in steering the gathering there, which is crazy. But I got a call from Finch on the 17th of June, a Sunday night, that he got stopped and taken apart, and we went to work. And I started cold calling lawyers and checking refs, and found a lawyer in Atlanta, got him information. We managed to raise enough money to pay him. Got him all the information on what this shit was about and the backdrop we had in terms of 2 federal court rulings, one in Kansas City and one in Jacksonville, deeming these kinds of roadblock activities unconstitutional. Got it set up, got him money, materialized plaintiffs at his office on the 2nd of July, and by the next afternoon, I get a call. I'm on the road planning to go to court in Gainesville, Georgia, ready to fight. Early morning, the lawyer calls me and says, Forest Service folded up. They've stipulated to an injunction. So they folded up without a fight in the face of these arguments, and then we'll spare the conversation about how the meeting the following week kind of got stepped on and the case got dropped, and I was through the ceiling because I hate dropping cases when you win. So that's the 3rd time we've been to court on the roadblock stuff, and the federal court said we were right. We still can't get these bastards to follow the law. So that's another issue. We're still have to carry that forward. But this is about specifically this permit regulation, which makes it a crime to assemble in the national forests as folks. And this has been, I believe, you know, if you read a little bit of legal history, you find great cases that took a long time to develop, you know,
Thurgood Marshall spent years
Brown
and
v. Board of
years
Education, a good example. It
developing
took
that case.
years, you know,
He
to
started
develop
with the
this.
military cases in the 40s.
Yeah.
Thurgood Marshall. Yeah.
So part of my message is that this issue of true assembly has not been dealt with anywhere else in First Amendment law until we started asserting it. And this is an historic fight that I believe is of really much broader impact, because if we can establish public assembly as a distinctive special use and recognized on these terms, because it's as a planner, I understand the permit stuff. It works generally fine at all levels of government, regulating local parks, forest, campgrounds. Somebody can usually is there. There's usually a sponsoring entity that the regulation that issues a permit as a legal instrument requires a permit holding group party of some kind. Usually there's one there. And no one has addressed this issue. What if there's no group? There's no legal entity in place, and you cannot construe the fact that we are standing in proximity to make us a group. That's the importance of Chicago v. Morales, the case out of Chicago, Supreme Court case that the city of Chicago issued an anti-gang ordinance that could disperse people who were gathered on the sidewalk or in the streets. Supreme Court said, no, these public streets and parks are public forum. People have a right to associate. You can't walk up and decide they're a gang. Same thing holds for the gatherings. We're not a gang. We're not a group. You can't contrive us to be one for purposes of regulation or excluding us from a public forum. And that's the decisive case that we have to proceed on. And I believe that's candidly in the petition, in the brief.
One thing you could mention too is that all these people that are here tonight every single one of them is a volunteer. None of them has been paid a dime to speak of, maybe here and there expenses over the years. And that is just phenomenal. I mean, because almost everything that happens in our country and, and legally is the result of the expenditure of tons and tons of money. And the fact that this is a non-group, this is so important. This is such a historical thing because there's almost no other, legal effort that's been pursued like that.
I see you dropped a lot of stuff in the chat, Scotty, some PDFs.
Yeah, I've been working on that, and I'll have some more.
And Garrick had something to add, and then I think Greg. So let's go Garrick and then Greg.
Oh, am I on?
Yes.
I'd like to say just a couple of things here, kind of, because I realize we're coming to a conclusion. First, thanks to everybody for participating, and I'm glad this is recorded. A lot of very valuable information for a legacy here and for sharing with others. The thing I want to emphasize most is what Scotty said not too long ago. I want to repeat it and just expand on it. And that is, we're really at a kind of stalemate. Since New Mexico case that said that those two people could not possibly sign to represent us, and the following year in Pennsylvania, where Ken Martin presented a rating plan and said, "This is your authorization." Shane contrived to be a resource design that is
somebody got to mute.
Absorb, the testimony from the recordings.
Oh,
the next day and the day after. Start writing the principle.
Dana.
God.
Mute them all, Dana.
Hello.
Andy, I think you might apologize.
But yeah.
Am I still
organized? They're not gonna. A lot of people are not going to get the
Stand by, Garrick.
oh, that's Jira. It's Ellen. That other lady is doing a
Am I on here, Dana? Let me know.
Yeah, somebody's talking over you.
Yeah, I think I got them.
Okay. So summarizing here, one, this has been a terrific conversation. I've done a lot of good listening, but the stalemate that we're at right now is the admin and resource people have decided not to fight us over the permit and issue some kind of resource design criteria or operating plan and actually work with us in the field to make things work out with the water and the parking and the fire prevention and all that kind of stuff. And the trade-off for that is they have, by not finding a way to declare us 100% legal and legitimate, they have given over the roads and the harassment on the roads to the law enforcement that continues to diminish our numbers, which was always, from 50 years ago, the government's primary objective. Diminish our numbers by harassing the living daylights out of people who are coming in, and people are scared to come. People are First Amendment rights to assemble and express themselves spiritually, religiously, politically, are chilled because of the ferocious harassment on the road. And That's what we've got to work out right now. And I commend Scotty for pushing this ball forward up the hill. Oh, Scotty, Sisyphus, Addison, thank you. Because we have an opportunity now with Randy Moore, who knows us and likes us and saw the oppression on the road of the law enforcement. We have an opportunity now to work something out with the Forest Service where there is a process whereby we are completely legitimate, completely authorized, without having to become a group or have an elected or authorized agent representative to speak for all the rest of us. And this is an opportunity now, and we've really got to move ahead on it. That's the solution to the stalemate. And I think amending the regs or changing the regs in some fashion to do that, Scotty is exactly on the right track. That's number one. Two, on the Georgia case, I can't commend Scotty enough for having gotten us into the hands of the right lawyer. And we won that case hands down. The Forest Service backed off. And even though there wasn't the follow-up that I had hoped for, or that Scotty had hoped for, or that others had hoped for, there wasn't the follow-up for a lot of reasons. The most important thing that has left us with is the lawyer's brief about the roadblock that invoked the Parks case and the Ocala case and the entire history of profiling. Our lawyer that Donnie worked with, and myself and Principal and Finch worked with, and Scotty helped arrange and raise the money for. This lawyer wrote this spectacular, timeless brief about road harassment in these type of situations, these public event assembly situations. And that brief, I want to get that out. I have it on a PDF. I want to get that out to people on email so that it's there early in Colorado and so that it's in the hands of people at regional gatherings and other similar events, because that brief nails it down 100% perfectly. It's one of the most brilliant legal documents I ever laid my eyes on. And I want to see that shared with people, the brief in support for our case. Yes, just personally speaking, 9 officers spent 4.5 hours in the hot Georgia sun tearing my stuff apart. And when they said, "Why do I object to the search?" I said, "I have something to protect." And they thought I was going to say constitutional rights. They said, "What do you have to protect?" And I said, everybody's dignity. And when that officer on the ground in the hot Georgia sun was rolling back up my 4th pair of underwear, because I changed my underwear at the gatherings.
Really?
He'd unrolled to see if there was any dope in it and putting it back into my pack. And I turned to the commanding officer and I said, "See, that guy's dignity and all of our dignity." I think I want to pass that Georgia brief around as much as possible. People email me or get in touch with me, and I will send that brief to you, because it is a precious, priceless document. And onward, on we go. We're 50 years at this. You know, if John Peter Zenger hadn't gone to prison, we wouldn't have freedom of the press. If Nelson Mandela hadn't gone to prison, we'd still have apartheid. And some of us have paid some prices, but onward. And just, I want to commend everybody who spent any bit of time working on this. Thank you. I'm done. I got to get to bed soon. We got to wrap this up, Scotty.
I'd just like to say a few words, guys.
Yeah.
First of
Andy had a question.
First of all, I just want to know, where's the feather? Come on, let's pass the feather. And it's really great seeing some of you guys. You, Scotty, Greg, Red Scotty. Dog, Steven. Oh, man, all you guys, it's so good seeing you. I think Water needs to trim his beard.
Took up the whole screen.
No,
Good
Water.
to see you, Dan.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to say is that I talked with Rainbow Turtle. It was before he signed that retraction, and I did an effort to convince him, to argue with him, that signing that thing that he signed was wrong. That 96 in Missouri would have been a really good place to deal court with the courts and win a battle. Right in the center of the country. I told him that, and I think he understood. And I'm glad to see that later on the 7th that he signed that retraction. That didn't work, but oh well. But love you guys, and really good to see you all. Alan, oh man, you're so good to see.
Have Scholar call him in the morning. I have a question.
Okay.
Or a statement. Okay. The gathering is taking on two aspects, the national gathering and regional gatherings. The nation today is full of homeless people as a result of the pandemic or whatever. Last year in Florida, there was a death. I have heard that there will be a swarm of houseless people at next year's Ocala gathering. And I think we should put some extra effort towards Shawna in next year's or this year's Ocala gathering, which will only be in a few months. Because if we get a series of bad reputations going, that will encourage and give fuel to law enforcement to act like law enforcement. And we don't want that. We want them to hang around in their cars eating donuts and stay away from the gathering. Okay, that's my point. Look out for this year's Ocala gathering. You've done a great job with the house, Scotty.
Yeah, well, I ain't done much. It's alive.
It looks nice. It looks nice.
Scotty?
John?
John.
Just on that note, sort of announcements, I don't know if you've had a chance to discuss a concern that I had raised to you from New Mexico about the presence of militia members who have decided that our First Amendment gathering is also an opportunity for a Second Amendment gathering. And I just want to alert people that there will be some number of people like that in Colorado this year as well. And we might want to spend some time addressing the fact that we don't want guns in church and we don't need guns to defend the church. I don't know, with the things like the synagogue stuff and these different things that have been happening, some of these militia people feel that that we need to be defended. And that's another thing where we don't want somebody to die, like was mentioned here, and have this sort of escalate. I think it's a very important issue that's coming at us that we all need to be aware of.
We had militia defending us in Oregon 97. They weren't running around inside the gathering with guns. But they were like out in some other camp on the fringes of things somewhere. They had this god-awful, powerful, illegal radio transmitter, and they'd come on late at night, and their call sign was Party Camp. And they let us and the cops and everybody else that had a receiver know that they were out there with guns, and if we got messed with, they were going to come in with their guns. And we didn't like this very much. But yeah, it wouldn't be the first time. On the side, Parker, on the side.
There was Second Amendment advocates at the Idaho gathering who were wearing their weapons in the church as well. And we had a very peaceful interaction with them while at the same time having to follow them and communicate with them as well. Idaho 2020 on the site.
Oh,
There's an issue in it there, in the concept and inception of the rainbow gatherings about being a peace and healing gathering, and that being essential to this distinctive forum and the soapbox of the gathering. It's about the message that we embrace, and it becomes an issue for the inclusiveness of the gatherings, and historically, which is monumental. But at a certain point, there's a boundary in terms of what activities and speech that you wish to be associated with when you gather, and what the gathering is about. And so the issue that you're hearkening to is a real thing. It may be that those who choose to protect or intimidate with guns might be in the same position, well, stay outside, keep guns and alcohol out of the gathering at all costs. And it's an issue in terms of how those assembled come together and say, no, this is a boundary that we do not want crossed. And that's a delicate issue, but I see this as part of the evolution of the gatherings. They've always, as I said, been inclusive. There have been generations of refugees from America who've come to the gatherings to act out and for healing, and a lot of people have been transformed. This is another episode, maybe more serious in some ways, but it's been within the capacities of gatherings to deal with that, to bring people in a constructive way. And this is going to be I agree, it's a Shantasina thing. It's going to take some discipline and preparation, but it's an important thing.
I would just like to address that, if I may. I've seen over the course of just the last 3 years an increase in individuals at the gatherings that are pro Second Amendment and publicly arming themselves at gatherings, walking through gatherings. And as well as I see that there is also in the last couple years been a connection with that, not, and this is a very loose painting and a very much a generality, but the Second Amendment, pro Second Amendment community connecting with the tenets of the First Amendment rights that go on at the gathering, and their various interactions increasing. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
To illustrate your point, in Idaho, PCU Free Assembly Project had a legal observer out there, and that really was helpful in creating that moderating influence on the ground, and also being able to get reliable facts in near real time instead of rumors. There were vigilantes out on ATVs with automatic weapons in the vicinity. It was Tom from COM who was our observer. He's gone public with that, but he was able to engage them. They were not threatening. They alleged that they were in kind of a watchful and protective mode. They did not try to come into the gathering, to my understanding. And that, that gets to be a point where somebody, on the trail says, wait a minute, we really don't want guns in the church. And that's the point where you say, this is a peace and healing forum. It's a First Amendment event, not a Second Amendment event. You can have Second Amendment events, but respect you're trying to engage respect in the intent and aspiration of a peace gathering. And it's, it's going to be an issue that has to be well handled. Okay. We've been lucky so far. And then last year in Florida, that guy who got shot, Martin Duggar, he just told somebody to slow down and got plugged on the drive-by on the road. And we were unable to kick loose any. I got no play from the Marion County Sheriffs, and following up in the investigation. That remains an unsolved crime, and that's the thing I'm concerned about.
The rumor I heard was that they looked like off-duty cops.
Well, that's a rumor. It's an appearance.
But this is nothing new. We had
it's happened before.
Right, we had two sisters killed on their way to the gathering in West Virginia, the first West Virginia gathering.
1980.
Yeah, and we had guns. Usually in the early days when guns came, they were carried by people who were pointing them at us. And now the people bringing the guns are, at least verbally, they're protecting us and our rights. That's what I ran into in Oregon and in Georgia. And in both those states, when I interacted with the people who brought their guns because they said they were going to be there to protect us, it was easy to get them to put their guns up. It wasn't so easy back when the guns came to point at us. I don't think we need to look at this with fear. I think we need to look at it with the word that you used, respect. If we go to them with respect and demand and request that they deal with us with respect, pretty much that's what happened.
In New Mexico, I was told by this individual with the gun in the gathering that Felipe had told him over the years that he had been around Kitty Village that it was okay to have a firearm to protect Kitty Village. And so I told this person I didn't know why Felipe would have said that, but if somebody, maybe Felipe needs to put out a statement in support of what you just said, Water, because he's going to bring a firearm to the gathering in Colorado. He's a member of a militia or three. And he's also running one of the Facebook pages for the Colorado gathering as well. So, and I couldn't get him to back down on this issue. He says Felipe gave him authorization.
John, every year in the beginning, there were people there who were of our family, of our gatherings, who were armed. They didn't wear their guns where it was visible. They kept their guns in their vehicles. Most of them had vehicles in Bus Village, some of them in the parking lot. And this was true almost every year. I took guns away from people many times between 76 and 85. It's nothing new. We just have to not be afraid about it. What happened in Ocala this past year is an aberration, and whether it was an undercover cop or a redneck or whatever it was, names like that and labels like that don't help us. I wasn't there. I didn't feel the vibe. I don't really understand what happened because I've heard differences in the stories. But the fact that it happened one time in all these years, and that those two sisters got killed in Virginia in all these years, is good reason for us not to fear, because we've been doing amazing things, bringing peace to this world.
If I may quickly just clarify, if perhaps I was not clear before. My observations are of in all actuality, of a positive nature. These individuals were very much pro First Amendment, very with us. So, and I'm in agreement with you, John. I agree. In the almost 30 years that I've been going to annuals, the sheer percentages of violent issues that have occurred just regarding guns, if not in general, is always been awesome to me, because I'm realistic, especially having been a gypsy traveler. The percentages of violence are so vastly lower. So we all know that just simply getting those levels of individuals together there's going to be a percentage of those situations. What I was saying is that I'm seeing a connection, a surgence in connection with those who are coming at it from, or at least initially, from a Second Amendment stance. And I feel like that percentage may grow over time. I'm observing it. And I feel that like Scottie said, just like with every community that is all part of the family, it's going to take creative and positive and wonderful ways in which we will bond and connect and find our understandings and communications in the process of that. As far as further understandings on both sides will be good. So just clarifying. Thank you.
Amen.
Wow. So how about we do a sort of closing circle? Like, you don't have to go home or anything, but we can continue the discussion into the morning if y'all want. But we did assemble saying we were going to talk about stuff for 90 minutes, and it's been 4 hours. Thanks everyone for being here and contributing and sharing your stories and your heart songs. And I'd like to ask that everybody turn on their videos and unmute their mics and put their hands up on the thing. So like we're holding hands with each other. Try to touch the screen next to yours and take a few deep breaths. And let's Om together.
So, yeah. Thank you for all the good juju, people.
Good night.
This is important.
Hey, thanks, Scottie, for inviting us.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
my
everybody.
pleasure.
Thank you, Scottie.
How lucky.
Night, everybody.
Well, later.
Thanks, Scottie.
Oh, I look forward
Thank
to
you.
looking. I look forward to
Yeah,
seeing
in
the video this
Colorado.
evening.
Love you, family. Love seeing everybody's beautiful faces.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Dandy, we were right on the same wavelength.
Oh,
I didn't see your suggestion.
I sent it to Scottie too. Right on.
Much love.
Where's my phone?
Hey, Joni, thanks
Hey.
for going to prison for us. I love you.
I could have thought of
Hey.
better things to do.
Since I got all the principles,
Love y'all. I'm going to
Love
since I
sleep.
got all the
Good night.
principles,
You too, hon.
Thanks. Good night.
Principal v. law. Is that what they?
since I got all the main players, since I got all the main players here, Johnny and Turtle and Scottie, somewhere in Scottie's garage is a VHS-C tape of when the cops pulled Turtle's van over while she was hauling Joni from Mavericks up to Owl's Nest.
Oh, really? I'd love to see that.
Oh yeah. As I remember it, Turtle got out of the van and was pulling all of that, flutter the eyelashes and wiggle the hips and tits and that innocent, sweet girly mojo that I can't do. She was working all that on the cops and baffling them. And then all of a sudden, I don't know why you said they couldn't find Wally. Because all of a sudden, here comes Wally running up with that long hair flapping and that beard flapping behind him. And I thought he was going to sucker punch that cop. And I was scared to death, because if he does that, then all the rest of those cops whose hands were like sitting right next to their guns looking all twitchy, were going to start shooting people. And the first one they were going to shoot was going to be the guy holding the video camera. And then all of a sudden, everybody's eyes were looking at Wally. And he starts getting up in that cop's face talking about constitutional rights and all this, and we don't need you here, blah, blah, blah. And while everybody's looking at Wally, Joni jumped out the van and ran off in the woods.
Yeah, TC also. We were together. TC ran out too. We were underneath a mattress or something in the back of the van.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? They pulled me over and they thought that I was you, Joni.
That's right.
That's you. And I was like, oh yeah, that's me. That's me.
Yeah, we were underneath a mattress in the back of the van with people all around. It was like you were shuttling people. We got out of there.
I'm going to sign off. I wanted to thank Dana for poking me and doing all this work. And Scotty, thank you. Love you.
Yeah. Amen.
Love you all. I'm going to sleep. It's
Love
like
you, John.
after
Thank you
morning
for
here.
everything you've done.
Thank you, guys.
You rock.
Love. Good night,
Scotty.
As
everybody.
always.
Yes.
Good night.
Everybody for putting this together.
Good to see you, Red Dog.
Well, we're gonna have to teach some youngers what the hell went on, because they got to get it. They have to get
I
it.
was hoping I'd hear some younger voices on here.
Like this. I want to hear more from you all. It's been so exciting to see you all here. I want to hear more. Let's do this more. More.
I will say we're
I
gonna
wanna
have
pass
another.
this shit on, man.
We're gonna lean on everybody's Zoom next month. We'll talk more about the current petition and what we were trying to find out what the USDA is going to do with this rulemaking process, but it's a real thing. And as Joni asked a very pertinent question some weeks back, way at the beginning. She says, we've talked to them before. What's different now? I said, we put something before them that they are obliged by law to deal with. So we got their holding their feet to the fire. We're going to find out how they're going to handle this rulemaking. There'll be probably some opportunity for public comment and places to lean on them with information and put it through. We'll explain more about it later. So there's going to be another Zoom in another few weeks or so.
Good.
Scotty,
I was hoping
if we could put this video onto some Facebook pages and maybe just let people or access link something. I think it'd be good, or you could send it to me and I could do that. I mean, just letting people be able to access this video, I think it would be very beneficial.
We're gonna figure out how to lodge it in an accessible place. I don't know about Facebook, but some place where at least you can pick up a link and find it somewhere. We'll figure that out. Facebook can be a zoo.
Hey, stay on the line, Scotty.